My husband Julian looked me dead in the eye while sipping the champagne I bought and said, "I want the house, the cars, and the company stocks. You can keep the kid, she is too distracting." My lawyer begged me to fight him in court to drag it out for years if necessary. But I looked at Julian sitting there with his smug grin and his brother's white wife, Tiffany, whispering in his ear, and I said, "Give it all to him." Everyone in the courtroom gasped. My mother started crying in the back row, thinking I had lost my mind. My friends blew up my phone, telling me I was being a doormat. At the final hearing, I signed everything over without shedding a single tear. Julian laughed as he walked out with millions in assets and the keys to our empire. He did not know that I had already won. He smiled until 30 days later when his lawyer turned pale as the IRS agents walked into his office, and he realized the assets I gave him came with a $15 million surprise attached. Before I tell you how I destroyed his life without lifting a finger, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the silent partner who actually held all the power. I am Regina, 34 years old, and for the last decade, I have been the invisible spine of Apex Solutions. My husband is Tech Empire. To the world, I was just the quiet wife who stayed home in our Buckhead mansion in Atlanta, raising our daughter while Julian graced the covers of business magazines. They saw him as the genius, and me as the lucky woman he rescued. Last Saturday was supposed to be a celebration of our journey. It was our 10th wedding anniversary. I had spent 3 days baking Julian his favorite cake from scratch, a 3-tier red velvet masterpiece with vanilla bean buttercream frosting, because no matter how rich we got, I still believed in the value of making things with my own hands. The house was filled with over 100 guests, including Julian, his biggest investors, board members, and the social elite of Atlanta, his Black community. I was wearing a gold gown that matched the theme of the night shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. I walked into the great room, balancing the heavy cake, carefully smiling at the sea of faces. Suddenly, the jazz music cut out. The room went silent. I thought Julian was about to make a toast to our love. He stood on the raised platform by the grand piano, holding a microphone, but his eyes were cold. He did not look at me with love. He looked at me like I was an employee he was about to fire. "Thank you everyone for coming tonight," Julian said, his voice booming through the speakers. "I know we are here to celebrate 10 years, but I have done a lot of thinking lately. A company like Apex requires a CEO who is unburdened, a man who is constantly upgrading, and frankly, I have outgrown this current chapter." I froze halfway across the room, the cake heavy in my arms. My heart started pounding in my throat. Julian continued without missing a beat. "So I am announcing tonight that this is my last party as a married man. Regina and I are filing for divorce effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the room. A wine glass shattered somewhere in the back. I felt like the floor was dissolving beneath my high heels. But Julian was not done. He gestured to the corner of the room where his brother Tyrell and his wife Tiffany were standing. Tiffany stepped forward, beaming like she had just won a pageant. She was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like a bridal gown. "And since I am entering a new era of excellence," Julian said, smiling at her, "I have asked my sister-in-law, Tiffany, to take over the interior design of this estate starting tomorrow. She has the most sophisticated taste of anyone I know, and she is going to help me rebrand my life to match the level of success I have achieved." Regina's style has always been a bit too domestic for where I am heading. Tiffany waved to the crowd, a fake, humble smile plastered on her face. Then she looked directly at me and said loudly enough for the front row to hear, "Don't not worry, Regina. I will make sure the house finally looks like a billionaire lives here." I stood there humiliated, my arms trembling from the weight of the cake and the weight of the betrayal. Julian stepped down from the platform, walked over to me, and pulled a thick envelope from his jacket pocket. He threw it right on top of the cake. The pristine white frosting smeared onto the legal documents. "Sign these tonight," he whispered, so only I could hear. And try not to get frosting on my Italian marble floors on your way out. I did not scream. I did not throw the cake at him, though every fiber of my being wanted to. I simply turned around and walked back into the kitchen, the sound of whispers following me like a swarm of bees. That was the moment the love died, and something much colder took its place. If you thought the party was bad, what happened later that night was the moment I knew there was no going back. I was in the kitchen scraping the ruined cake into the trash when the front door opened. It was not just Julian. Tyrell and Tiffany walked in dragging 4 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases. They did not knock. They walked in like they owned the place. Julian. I said, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. Why are they here? Julian loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch, ignoring me. Tiffany answered for him. Oh, honey, we are moving in to support Julian during this difficult transition. Divorce is so hard on a man, especially when he has to deal with a clingy ex-wife. Plus, I need to be on site to supervise the renovations. Renovations? I asked, stepping out of the kitchen. This house is fine. I designed this house. Tiffany laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. That is exactly the problem, Regina. She walked over to the living room wall where I had hung a collection of rare tribal masks and tapestries I had brought back from Ghana and Senegal. Art that connected us to our heritage. Art that cost more than Tyrell made in a year. Tiffany reached out with 2 fingers as if touching something infectious. This she said, wrinkling her nose. It is just so dark, isn't it? It is very voodoo chic. It makes the space feel heavy and honestly a little scary. We are going for a clean aesthetic, Scandinavian minimalist. Lots of beige, lots of white, lots of empty space. We need to erase all this clutter so Julian's mind can breathe. She pulled a priceless mask off the wall and tossed it onto the sofa like it was a cheap toy. My blood began to boil. That mask was a gift from my grandmother. Do not touch my things, I said, stepping forward. Julian slammed his glass down on the counter. Enough, Regina, he barked. Tiffany is the professional here. She has a vision. You have always had too much sentimental junk. Let her do her job. Just then I heard small footsteps on the stairs. It was my 7-year-old daughter, Maya. She was clutching her favorite teddy bear, Mr. Cuddles, which was missing an eye and had worn out fur from years of love. She looked terrified. Mommy, Maya whispered, rubbing her eyes. Why are Uncle Tyrell and Aunt Tiffany shouting? Tiffany turned her gaze to my daughter. Her eyes did not soften. Instead, she looked at Maya's teddy bear with the same disgust she had shown my art. Oh, look at that filthy thing, she said, walking over to Maya. Sweetie, we do not bring dirty rags into a fresh house. Before I could move, Tiffany snatched the bear from Maya's hands. No! Maya screamed, reaching for it. Tiffany marched to the kitchen and dropped the bear into the trash can right on top of the smashed red velvet cake. Time for an upgrade, sweetie, she said, wiping her hands as if she had touched garbage. We will buy you a nice clean white rabbit, something that matches the new sofa. Maya burst into tears, screaming for her bear. I rushed over and hugged her, burying her face in my waist so she would not see the cruelty in their eyes. Julian, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Tell her to get the bear out of the trash, now. Julian looked at his sobbing daughter, then at his brother and sister-in-law. He adjusted his cufflinks. Maya, stop crying, he yelled. You are being dramatic just like your mother. Tiffany is right. That thing was a health hazard. I am a CEO. I need peace and quiet, not a screaming child and a nagging wife. Take her upstairs. He pointed a finger at me. And not to the master bedroom. Tyrell and Tiffany are taking the master suite tonight. They need the space to plan the renovation. You and the kid can sleep in the guest room downstairs, the small one near the laundry room. My jaw dropped. You are kicking me out of my own bed, in the house my credit score paid for. It is my house now, Regina, Julian said, checking his watch. Or it will be once you sign those papers. Get used to your new station in life. You are a guest here now. And guests who make noise get evicted. I looked at Tiffany, who was smirking while leaning against my granite island. I looked at Tyrell, who was already raiding my liquor cabinet. and I looked at Julian, the man I had built from nothing. I picked up my sobbing daughter and walked to the guest room. I did not retrieve the bear. I realized in that moment that retrieving the bear would be a small victory. I did not want a small victory. I wanted total war. I laid Maya down on the small, stiff mattress in the guest room. She cried herself to sleep, asking why Daddy was being mean. I stroked her hair until her breathing slowed. The walls of the laundry room hummed next to us, a stark contrast to the silence of the master suite upstairs. I could hear them walking above us. I could hear Tiffany's heels clicking on the hardwood floors I had picked out. I could hear them laughing. They thought they had broken me. They thought stripping me of my room, my art, and my daughter as comfort object would make me crumble. They forgot one crucial detail. The security system in this house, the cameras in every room, the servers that ran Julian's company, and the bank accounts that paid for that scotch they were drinking were all set up by me. I pulled out my laptop and sat on the cold floor. I did not turn on the light. I did not need light to see what I was about to do. I logged into the main administrative panel for the house network. The screen glowed blue in the darkness, illuminating my face. I saw the live feed from the living room. Tiffany was holding a glass of my best wine, gesturing around the room, describing how she would paint everything beige. Julian was nodding, looking like a king on his throne. I watched them for a long time. I let the anger crystallize into something sharp and cold. Julian wanted a divorce. He wanted the house, he wanted the cars, and he specifically said he wanted the company. I opened the folder on my desktop labeled Maya Holdings. It was a shell company I had created years ago, one that Julian thought was just a small savings account for Maya's college. He had never bothered to ask what assets were actually inside it. He never asked who owned the intellectual property rights to the source code that Apex Solutions ran on. He just assumed because he was the CEO, he owned it all. I looked at the divorce papers he had thrown on the cake. I wiped a smear of red frosting off the signature line. I took a pen from my purse. My hand did not shake. I signed my name. "You want the house, Julian?" I whispered to the screen, watching him laugh at something Tyrell said. "Take it. You want the company, take the shell. But you have no idea that you are evicting the architect and keeping the crumbling building." I closed the laptop. The game had begun. Tomorrow I would give him exactly what he asked for, and it would be the worst thing that ever happened to him. The conference room at the law firm was colder than a morgue. It was fitting, I suppose, because I was watching the corpse of my 10-year marriage being dissected on a mahogany table long enough to land a small plane on. The air smelled of expensive leather and stale coffee. Across from me sat Julian. He was wearing a navy bespoke suit that I had picked out for him last Christmas. He looked impeccable. He looked powerful. And he looked at me with the same indifference he would show a stranger on the subway. Next to him was his lawyer, a man named Sterling, who had a reputation for destroying lives and smiling while he did it. Sterling adjusted his glasses and slid a thick document across the table toward me and my lawyer, Mr. Cohen. "Let us not waste time," Sterling said, his voice smooth and venomous. "Julian is a very busy man. Apex Solutions is on the verge of a historic IPO. We need this matter settled quietly and quickly. Here is our final offer." Mr. Cohen opened the folder. I watched his face turn red. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. He slammed the folder shut and pushed it back. "This is a joke," Cohen spat. "You cannot be serious. You want 100% of the company stock. You want the primary residence. You want the vacation home in Aspen. You want the entire fleet of vehicles. And you are offering Mrs. Brooks a spousal support stipend of $2,000 a month for 24 months. That is barely enough to rent a studio apartment in this city. Regina built that company alongside Julian. She is entitled to half." Julian finally looked up from his phone. He did not look at Cohen. He looked at me. His eyes were empty of any warmth. "Regina did not build anything," Julian said calmly. "She was a housewife, Cohen. She baked cakes. She changed diapers. She picked out curtains. I built Apex. I wrote the code. I closed the deals. I am the face of the brand. And right now that brand needs to be unencumbered by a dependent ex-wife. The lie was so bold, so audacious that I almost laughed. I wanted to scream that I wrote the original source code while he was asleep on the couch. I wanted to scream that I taught him how to pitch to investors, but I stayed silent. I gripped the armrests of my leather chair until my knuckles turned white. "We will go to trial," Cohen declared. "No judge in Atlanta will sign off on this. This is financial abuse. We will expose everything, Julian. We will audit every account." That is when Julian leaned forward. The indifference vanished, replaced by a predatory glint. He placed his elbows on the table and interlaced his fingers. "You really do not want to go to trial, Regina," he said softly. "Because if we go to trial, everything becomes public record. And I mean everything." He pulled a smaller, thinner folder from his briefcase. He opened it and slid a single piece of paper toward me. It was a photocopy of a medical intake form from 7 years ago. "I remember when Maya was born," Julian said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "I remember how hard it was for you. The crying. The days you could not get out of bed. The time you left the stove on because you were so distracted by the voices in your head. Postpartum depression is a terrible thing, Regina. Or was it postpartum psychosis?" My blood ran cold. I felt the room spinning. He was using the darkest, most vulnerable moment of my life against me. The months where I struggled to find my footing as a new mother. The months he was never home because he was too busy networking. "My lawyer has a very interesting strategy for a custody hearing," Julian continued. "We are prepared to argue that given your history of mental instability and your lack of income, you are unfit to be the primary custodial parent. If you fight me for the money, Regina, I will spend every dime I have to paint you as a danger to our daughter. I will bury you in legal fees until you are homeless, and I will make sure you only see Maya on supervised visits every other weekend." He sat back looking satisfied. "Take the deal, Regina. Walk away clean. You get no assets, but you get to keep full custody of the girl. I do not want her anyway. She is better off with you. I need my freedom." Mr. Cohen looked at me, his eyes wide with horror. "Regina, do not listen to him. This is blackmail. We can fight this. We can get expert witnesses. Do not let him bully you." I looked at the paper on the table. Then I looked at Julian. For a moment I saw the man I used to love, the man who held my hand in the delivery room. That man was dead. In his place sat a monster fueled by greed and ego. A monster who would burn his own child as happiness just to save a few $1,000,000. I felt a tremor go through my body. It started in my hands and traveled up to my chest. But it was not fear. It was not sadness. It was a rage so pure, so hot that it felt like it was cauterizing my wounds. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just the woman who baked cakes. He had forgotten who I really was. He had forgotten that before I was a mother, I was a mathematician. I was a coder. I was the architect of his entire reality. And in that moment of absolute clarity, I remembered the safety switch. I remembered Maya Holdings. I remembered the copyright registrations that were sitting in a safety deposit box he knew nothing about. If I fought him now for half the assets, I would get half of a company that I would eventually have to share with him. But if I gave him everything, if I let him take the bait, he would walk right into the trap I had set 10 years ago. The only way to destroy him completely was to let him think he had won. I took a deep breath. The shaking stopped. I smoothed out the skirt of my dress. I looked Julian dead in the eye. I did not blink. "You are right, Julian," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I do not want a war. I do not want Maya to see her parents fighting in court." "Regina." "What are you doing?" Cohen whispered urgently, grabbing my arm. I pulled my arm away. "I am doing what is best for my daughter," I said, keeping my eyes on Julian. "You want the company. You want the house. You want the cars. Fine. Take them." Julian's eyes widened, slightly surprised by my sudden surrender. Then a smug grin spread across his face. "Smart girl," he said. "But I have one condition," I said. Sterling rolled his eyes. "Here we go." I want it in writing, I said, pointing to the contract. I want a clause that states clearly and irrevocably that Julian Brooks retains 100% ownership and liability for Apex Solutions and all its physical assets. And in exchange, I retain full legal and physical custody of Maya and sole ownership of the entity known as Maya Holdings, along with its contents. Julian laughed. Maya Holdings, that little savings account you set up. What is in there, 5 grand? Something like that, I said, shrugging. It is for her college. You do not care about her education, do you? I do not care about pocket change. Julian scoffed. Sterling, write it in. She keeps the kid and her piggy bank. I get the empire. I watched Sterling typing on his laptop. I watched the printer in the corner whir to life. I watched the paper slide out, the paper that would strip me of my home, my car, and my fortune. But as I picked up the pen, I did not feel poor. I felt like a hunter watching a wolf walk into a cage. I signed my name with a flourish. Done, I said, pushing the papers across the mahogany table. Julian snatched them up, checking the signature like he thought it might disappear. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. You made the right choice, Regina, he said, not even bothering to offer a handshake. Have fun living in the real world. I hear the rental market is tough these days. He walked out of the room, followed by his lawyer. They were laughing before the door even closed. My lawyer, Mr. Cohen, sat with his head in his hands. Regina. I cannot believe you did that. You just gave away $50 million. You let him win. I stood up and picked up my purse. I walked over to the window and looked out at the Atlanta skyline. Somewhere out there, Julian was probably already popping champagne with Tiffany. No, Mr. Cohen, I said quietly. I did not give away $50 million. I just gave him the keys to a car that has no engine. Cohen looked at me confused. What do you mean? I turned to him, and for the first time in weeks I smiled. A real, genuine, dangerous smile. Julian thinks Apex Solutions is the company, I said. But Apex is just the shell. It is just the interface. The source code, the actual brain of the software that runs his entire platform, belongs to Maya Holdings. And he just signed over Maya Holdings to me. Cohen is jaw-dropped. He has 30 days until the license expires, I said, checking my watch. Let him enjoy his victory lap. Because when that clock strikes midnight on the 30th day, he is going to realize that he is the CEO of absolutely nothing. I walked out of the conference room, leaving my lawyer stunned in silence. I had lost the house. I had lost the lifestyle. But I had my daughter. And in my pocket I had the detonator to Julian's entire life. The game was on. I drove away from that meeting with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned the color of bone. The streets of Atlanta blurred past me. The towering glass skyscrapers where Julian played the big shot CEO seemed to mock me. He thought he had crushed me back there in that conference room. He thought threatening to take my daughter was the checkmate move. He saw a scared mother. He saw a woman who had spent the last 7 years picking up dry cleaning and organizing charity galas. He saw a wife who had lost her edge. But as I merged onto the highway, the fear began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard memory. I laughed out loud, a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the empty car. Julian Brooks, the tech genius. Julian Brooks, the visionary. That was the brand we sold to the world. But I knew the truth. I knew the man behind the curtain because I was the one who stitched the curtain together. My mind drifted back 10 years. We were living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Midtown. The air conditioner was broken, and the air smelled like stale pizza and ambition. Julian was a pharmaceutical sales rep back then. He had $1 million smile and a cheap suit, but he could not write a line of code if his life depended on it. He was the dreamer, the talker, the face. I was the one with the degree from MIT buried in a drawer under my socks, because Julian said it intimidated his friends. I remembered the night Apex was born. Julian had come home drunk from a networking event, ranting about how the software on the market was too slow, too clunky. He had the idea for the interface, he knew what the clients wanted, but he had no idea how to build it. While he passed out on the sofa, I opened my laptop. I did not sleep for 3 days. I drank pot after pot of black coffee, my fingers flying across the keyboard, building the architecture of a system that would revolutionize the industry. When Julian woke up and saw what I had created, he cried. He hugged me and said we were going to be rich. He said we were a team. But as the money started rolling in, the we became I. He became the CEO. I became the CEO's wife, and I let it happen. I stepped back into the shadows because I loved him and because I wanted a family. But I was never stupid. 6 years ago, right after Maya was born, I saw the first crack in the mask. Julian had bought a Porsche without telling me while I was struggling to pay for diapers. He had started coming home late, smelling of perfume that was not mine. That was the night I made a decision that would save my life today. I created a separate legal entity, a shell company named Maya Holdings. I told Julian it was a tax shelter for our daughter's future education fund. He laughed, patting me on the head like a child, and said, "Sure, babe, whatever makes you feel useful." He signed the papers without reading them. He never knew that the next day I transferred the intellectual property rights, the actual source code of the Apex software, into Maya Holdings. Then I leased it back to Apex Solutions for a nominal fee of $1 a year. It was a ticking time bomb buried in mountains of paperwork waiting for the day he would betray me. I pulled into the parking lot of my lawyer's office. Mr. Cohen was already waiting for me, pacing back and forth in his office like a nervous cat. When I walked in, he looked like he had seen a ghost. "Regina, please tell me you are not seriously considering his offer," he stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You cannot give him everything. The house alone is worth $4 million. The stock options are worth 40. If you sign that paper, you are walking away with nothing but the clothes on your back." I sat down and crossed my legs. I felt calm, dangerous. "I am not walking away with nothing. Mr. Cohen," I said quietly. "I am walking away with the only thing that matters." Cohen slammed his hand on the desk. "This is insane. He is bullying you. We can fight the custody threat. We can hire forensic psychologists. Do not let him scare you into poverty." "He is not scaring me," I said. "He is underestimating me, and that is exactly where I want him." I reached into my purse and pulled out a flash drive. I placed it on the desk. "Mr. Cohen, I want you to draft the settlement agreement exactly as Julian asked. Give him the house, give him the cars, give him 100% of the equity in Apex Solutions, give him the furniture, the art, the silverware." "I do not care." Cohen stared at me, his mouth open. But I continued, leaning forward. "There is one specific clause I need you to insert. It needs to be in the section regarding minor assets and miscellaneous entities." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Write that Julian Brooks voluntarily relinquishes all claims ownership and interest in the entity known as Maya Holdings and all its assets, tangible and intangible. In exchange, Regina Brooks relinquishes all claims to Apex Solutions." Cohen looked confused. "The college fund? The piggy bank account? Regina, that has maybe $5,000 in it? Why are you worried about that when he is stealing 50 million? Because," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "Maya Holdings is not a piggy bank." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where Julian was probably right now toasting to his victory. "Julian thinks Apex is the engine," I said. "But Apex is just the body of the car. It is the shiny paint and the leather seats. Maya Holdings owns the engine. It owns the transmission. It owns the wheels. Apex leases the technology from Maya Holdings. And that lease agreement has a termination clause." Cohen stopped breathing for a second. He looked at me with wide eyes, realizing for the first time who was actually sitting in his office. "What is the termination clause?" he whispered. I turned back to him. "The lease terminates automatically if Julian Brooks is no longer married to Regina Brooks." The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the same sound that used to fill our apartment when I wrote that code. Cohen started to laugh. It started as a chuckle and turned into a full belly laugh of disbelief. So you mean to tell me, he asked, grinning wildly, that if he signs this divorce decree, he is effectively firing himself? He is stripping his own company of the right to use its own software. Exactly, I said. And since he is so arrogant, he will never check the IP registry. He thinks he built it, so he assumes he owns it. He has no idea that for the last 6 years, he has been renting his own empire from his wife for $1 a year. Cohen shook his head, looking at me with a newfound reverence. You are terrifying, Regina. Remind me never to cross you. He sat down at his computer and cracked his knuckles. I will draft it immediately, he said. We will bury the Maya Holdings clause on page 42, right between the pet custody and the gym membership details. He will skip right over it. Make sure the language is airtight, I said. I want him to feel like he won. I want him to walk out of that courtroom thinking he stripped me bare. Because the higher he climbs, the harder he is going to fall when I pull the rug out. Cohen looked at me one last time before typing. He is going to think you are crazy, he warned. Giving up a fortune for a savings account. I picked up my purse and headed for the door. Let him think I am crazy, I said. Let him think I am weak. Let him think I am just a broken-hearted woman trying to save pennies for her daughter. That is the only way this works. I walked out of the office and back into the heat of the Atlanta afternoon. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. Drafts will be ready tomorrow. Do not be late, and do not bring any drama. I looked at the message and typed back 2 words. No drama. I deleted the text and started my car. The engine roared to life. I drove toward the highway, toward the small rental apartment I had secured for me and Maya. It was tiny. It had no pool, no marble floors, no view of the skyline. But it was going to be the headquarters of my new life. Julian wanted to play chess. He just did not realize that while he was busy capturing pawns, I had already positioned my queen to take his king. The next 24 hours were going to be the longest of my life, but I was ready. I was going to sign my life away, and I was going to do it with a smile. The morning of the mediation hearing, the Atlanta sky was a bruised purple color, heavy with unshed rain. I dressed in a charcoal gray cardigan and a simple black skirt. I pulled my hair back into a severe low bun and wore no makeup. I needed to look tired. I needed to look defeated. I needed to look like a woman who had been crushed under the weight of her husband's success. Looking in the mirror, I did not recognize the shark swimming behind my own eyes. I arrived at the courthouse 15 minutes early, but Julian was already there, and he had brought an audience. Sitting on the wooden bench outside the courtroom was Julian, looking like a GQ cover model in a 3-piece Italian suit. Next to him was Tiffany, his sister-in-law. She was wearing a white blazer that looked suspiciously similar to the one I had worn to my bridal shower. She was scrolling on her phone, smiling as if she were waiting for a table at brunch, not a divorce hearing. But the real shock was the woman sitting on Julian's other side. She could not have been more than 22. She was wearing a neon pink bodycon dress that barely covered her thighs, and she was popping gum loudly. I recognized her from Instagram. Her handle was Candy with a K, and she posted mostly photos of herself on yachts that did not belong to her. Julian looked up as I approached. He did not have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, he rested his hand on Candy's knee. "You made it?" he said, checking his watch. "I was worried you would get lost. I know you are not used to coming downtown without a driver." I ignored the jab. I ignored Tiffany's snicker. I ignored the way Candy looked me up and down with pity in her heavily lashed eyes. I simply gripped my purse tighter, the strap digging into my shoulder. "Let us just get this over with, Julian," I said softly, keeping my eyes on the floor. We walked into the conference room where Judge Harrison was waiting. She was a formidable woman in her 60s with keen eyes that had seen every lie a spouse could tell. She looked at Julian's entourage with distinct disapproval. especially when Candy sat down and immediately started taking a selfie. Judge Harrison put on her reading glasses and opened the settlement agreement file. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the sound of Candy chewing her gum. I watched the judge's eyes scan the pages. Her eyebrows climbed higher and higher with every paragraph. She stopped reading and looked up over her glasses, staring directly at me. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, her voice stern, "I have reviewed this agreement. Do you understand what you are signing here?" "Yes, Your Honor," I whispered. The judge shook her head. "Mrs. Brooks, this is not a standard division of assets. In fact, it is completely lopsided. Your husband is retaining the marital home valued at $4 million. He is retaining all vehicles. He is retaining 100% of the stock in his company. You are walking away with a small stipend and—" She squinted at the paper. "Sole ownership of a dormant entity called Maya Holdings, which appears to have no valuation." She leaned forward. "Mrs. Brooks, are you under duress? Has anyone threatened you or coerced you into accepting these terms?" The room went deadly quiet. I could feel Julian stiffen beside me. I could feel Tiffany holding her breath. This was the moment. If I showed even a hint of backbone, the judge would throw this agreement out. She would order a forensic audit. She would force a fair fight. And a fair fight was the last thing I wanted. I took a shaky breath. I forced tears to well up in my eyes. It was not hard. I just thought about Tiffany throwing my daughter as bare in the trash. "No, Your Honor," I said, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "I am not being threatened. I am tired. I cannot fight him. He has the best lawyers. He has the money. I just want peace for my daughter. I want to take her and go. Please, just let me sign it." I saw the judge's expression soften from suspicion to pity. She saw a broken woman. She saw a victim. She looked at Julian with disgust. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice icy, "you should be ashamed of yourself, leaving the mother of your child with practically nothing while you parade around town." Julian shrugged, buttoning his jacket. "She wants out, Judge. I am giving her an out. It is what she asked for." The judge sighed. She picked up her stamp. "Very well. Since both parties are consenting adults and legal counsel is present, I will approve the agreement." She slid the papers across the massive oak table. Julian grabbed the pen before it even stopped sliding. He did not read a single word. His eyes were wide with greed, fixed on the prize. He flipped past the custody arrangement. He flipped past the alimony schedule. He went straight to the asset distribution page. He signed his name with a large, aggressive loop. "There," he said, pushing the papers toward me. "It is over." "Not yet, Julian, my lawyer," Mr. Cohen interrupted. "You need to sign the transfer of the non-marital assets." "The clause regarding Maya Holdings." Julian rolled his eyes. He looked at Candy, who was checking her nails. "Babe, give me a second," he said to her. "I have to sign over a piggy bank to my ex." He grabbed the second document. This was the document. The one I had spent nights agonizing over. The one that contained the legal language transferring all intellectual property rights held by Maya Holdings back to me, along with the termination of any existing lease agreements. Julian looked at the title. Transfer of Ownership. Maya Holdings, LLC. He scoffed. "Enjoy your $5,000, Regina. Buy the kid some new shoes." He scribbled his signature. He did not read the fine print. He did not read the paragraph that defined the assets of Maya Holdings as including all source code algorithms and proprietary architecture currently utilized by Apex Solutions. He stamped it with his thumbprint as required by the court. The sound of that stamp hitting the paper was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It sounded like a guillotine dropping. I took the pen. My hand was steady now. I signed my name next to his. I signed away the mansion. I signed away the Porsche. And then I signed the document that accepted ownership of his entire life, his work. Judge Harrison notarized the documents. It is done, she said, closing the file. You are divorced. Julian stood up immediately. He high-fived his lawyer. Tiffany clapped her hands giddily. Candy finally looked up from her phone and popped her gum. Yay, are we going to lunch now? She asked. I am starving. Yes, babe, we are going to lunch, Julian said. We are going to the most expensive place in the city. He turned to me. The courtroom began to clear out, but he lingered for a moment. He leaned in close, his cologne smelling of sandalwood and arrogance. Thank you for being stupid, Regina, he whispered in my ear. I looked up at him. I did not flinch. He continued, his voice dripping with malice. You really made this easy for me. I thought you would put up a fight. I thought you had some fight left in you. But you are just like your mother. Weak. Tiffany walked by and brushed her shoulder against mine. Bye, Regina, she said, smirking. Do not worry about the house. I am going to burn that hideous furniture of yours in the backyard tomorrow. It will be a cleansing ceremony. They walked out of the courtroom laughing. I could hear their voices echoing down the marble hallway. They were celebrating. They were planning their renovation. They were planning their IPO party. Mr. Cohen looked at me. He was pale. He was sweating. Regina, he whispered, you really did it. You sat there and let them insult you. I slowly picked up my copy of the Maya Holdings transfer agreement. I folded it carefully and placed it in my purse. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. Mr. Cohen. I said, my voice completely different now. The tremble was gone. The fear was gone. Yes, Regina. I want you to file this document with the Copyright Office immediately. Expedite the processing. I want the transfer official by 9 a.m. tomorrow. And then I continued walking toward the door. And then draft a cease and desist letter. But do not send it yet. Cohen scurried after me. When do we send it? I stopped at the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. I looked back at the empty chair where Julian had sat, where he had signed his own death warrant without reading. We wait 30 days, I said. We wait until the morning of his IPO. We wait until he rings that bell on Wall Street. And then, we turn off the lights. I pushed open the doors and walked out into the hallway. The rain outside had started to fall, hitting the windows in angry sheets. But I did not mind the rain. It was washing away the old Regina. Julian had called me stupid. He had told me to get out of his life. I walked to the elevator, a small smile playing on my lips. Careful what you wish for, Julian. It took me 10 years to turn that house from a cold structure of brick and mortar into a home filled with warmth and memories. It took me 10 years to curate the art on the walls, to plant the hydrangeas in the garden, and to choose the exact shade of cream for the nursery, where I rocked my daughter to sleep. But it took only 2 hours to pack my entire life into 3 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. The hallway echoed as I walked down the stairs holding Maya's hand. She was clutching a small plastic bag with her few remaining toys, since Tiffany had thrown away her favorite bear. The house felt different now. It did not feel like mine anymore. It felt like a museum I was being kicked out of. I could hear the hum of the central air conditioning, a system I had paid to upgrade last summer, so Julian would sleep better. Every corner of this mansion held a piece of my soul, and I was leaving it all behind for a man who did not even know the code to the security gate. I walked toward the heavy oak front doors, keeping my head high. I refused to let them see me crumble. I refused to let the staff see me cry. But just as I reached for the handle, a voice cut through the silence like a serrated knife. Not so fast, Regina. I stopped and closed my eyes for a second, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I turned around. Tiffany was standing there blocking the exit. She was wearing a silk robe. My silk robe. The one I had bought in Paris on our honeymoon. She had a clipboard in one hand and a glass of mimosa in the other. Julian asked me to conduct a final inventory, she said, stepping closer, her perfume overpowering the scent of the fresh lilies in the foyer. We need to make sure you are not looting estate assets. You know how sticky fingers can get during a divorce. Looting, I repeated, my voice flat. Tiffany, I bought everything in this house. The rug you are standing on costs more than your car. She laughed, taking a sip of her drink. Corrections, sweetie. You bought it with Julian as money, which means it belongs to Julian. And now it belongs to the estate, so open the bags. She pointed a manicured finger at the suitcases sitting by my feet. I looked at Maya. She looked scared, holding my leg tight. Maya, go wait by the door, I said softly. Maya moved away and I unzipped the first suitcase. It was humiliating. It was degrading. It was exactly what they wanted. Tiffany kicked the bag open with her foot. She crouched down, sifting through my clothes like she was rummaging through a discount bin. She threw my sweaters onto the floor. She shook out my jeans. She opened my toiletry bag and inspected my face creams. "Oh, this brand is expensive," she said, holding up a jar of moisturizer. "I think I will keep this. Julian says his skin has been dry lately." She tossed my personal items into a pile behind her. I stood there watching her rob me in broad daylight inside the house I technically still owned until the papers were processed. I did not stop her. I let her take the cream. I let her take the silk scarf. I let her take the dignity of the moment because I knew what was coming in 30 days. Then she saw it. Tucked into the side pocket of my carry-on was a small velvet pouch. Tiffany's eyes lit up. She snatched it before I could react. "What is this?" she asked, pulling the drawstring open. She tipped the bag upside down, and a heavy gold necklace slid into her palm. It was an antique locket, intricate and worn with age. It was not flashy. It did not have diamonds. But it was the most valuable thing I owned. It had belonged to my grandmother, who had passed it down to my mother, who had given it to me on my wedding day. It was the only heirloom I had left. "Give that back, Tiffany," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "That is not a marital asset. That is a family heirloom. It is not on the inventory list." Tiffany held it up to the light, swinging it back and forth. "It looks like real gold," she said, her eyes narrowing. "And gold is an asset, Regina. How do I know you did not buy this with Julian, his credit card last week to hide money?" "You know exactly where that came from," I hissed, stepping forward. "You were at the wedding. You saw my mother put it on my neck. Give it to me." Tiffany smirked and clasped her fingers around the locket. "I do not think so," she said. "I think this stays here until we can get it appraised. If it is worth less than $500, maybe Julian will mail it to you. But honestly, it goes really well with the new aesthetic I am planning. Vintage chic, you know." My hands curled into fists at my sides. The rage was blinding. I wanted to tackle her. I wanted to tear that robe off her body and drag her out of my house. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered. That necklace held the picture of my grandmother inside. It was sacred. But then I looked past Tiffany. Through the glass of the living room window, I could see Julian. He was sitting on the patio talking on the phone, probably bragging to an investor about the IPO. He looked comfortable. He looked safe. If I fought Tiffany now for the necklace, she would call the police. She would claim I assaulted her. Julian would use that police report to prove I was unstable. He would use it to take Maya. He would win. I looked at Tiffany standing there with her smug grin, holding my history hostage. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to see the angry black woman that society expected me to be so she could play the victim. I unclenched my fists. I exhaled slowly, pushing the anger down into the pit of my stomach, where it would serve as fuel for the fire I was about to light. "Keep it," I said, cold and sharp. Tiffany blinked, surprised by my surrender. "Really?" she asked, suspicious. "Yeah, keep it," I said, zipping up my bag. "It is a mourning piece, actually. My grandmother wore it to funerals." I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and took Maya's hand. I walked past Tiffany, stopping just inches from her face. "Consider it a down payment on the funeral for your personality," I whispered. "Because honestly, you are going to need more than gold to fix what is rotting inside you." Tiffany gasped, clutching the necklace to her chest, but I was already moving. I pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped out into the humid Atlanta air. The sun was shining, but it felt cold. I walked down the long driveway lined with the cherry blossom trees I had planted. I walked past the three-car garage. The door was open. I could see my white Porsche Cayenne parked next to Julian's Tesla. I walked right past them. Parked on the street outside the gate was a 10-year-old sedan with faded paint and a dent in the rear bumper. It was the car I had bought for $2,000 cash yesterday from a neighbor. It smelled like old cigarettes and disappointment. I opened the door for Maya and buckled her in. "Mommy? Why are we taking the ugly car?" she asked, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Because, baby," I said, climbing into the driver's seat, "this ugly car is the Freedom Express." I started the engine. It sputtered and coughed before roaring to life with a loud rattle. I looked up at the house one last time. I saw Tiffany standing in the window watching us leave. She was putting the necklace on, posing in the mirror. I shifted the car into drive. "Enjoy the view, Tiffany," I thought to myself. "Enjoy the marble floors. Enjoy the pool. Enjoy the man. Because you have no idea that you are standing in a house of cards, and I just pulled the bottom card out." I did not look back as I drove away. The gates closed behind us, sealing my past inside. I gripped the steering wheel of that rusted sedan, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange, terrifying thrill. They thought they had stripped me bare. They thought they had sent me away with nothing. But as I merged onto the highway headed toward our tiny rental apartment, I touched my purse. Inside was the transfer document. Inside was the key to the nuclear bomb that was ticking down. Julian had 30 days until his company went public. 30 days to brag. 30 days to shine. I turned on the radio and hummed along to a song. I was going to enjoy counting down every single second. The 30 days following our divorce were the quietest of my life, but for Julian, they were the loudest. I sat in my small two-bedroom apartment listening to the hum of a window air conditioning unit while Julian turned my former life into a circus. I did not block him on social media. I did not ask my friends to stop sending me screenshots. I watched every single moment of his victory lap because I needed to time my strike perfectly. Julian was living like a man who had cheated death. He bought a neon green Lamborghini the day after I moved out. He posted a video of himself revving the engine in the driveway of our estate with the caption, "New toys for the new era." He was featured on the cover of a local business magazine under the headline, "The Bachelor Billionaire: How Julian Brooks Built an Empire Alone." I cut that picture out and taped it to my refrigerator right next to Maya's drawing of a broken heart. It was a daily reminder of why I could not show mercy. But the real transformation was happening inside the house. Tiffany was on a rampage. She called it a renovation, but it looked more like an erasure. She hired a demolition crew to tear down the walls I had painted. She sold my antique furniture for pennies on the dollar just to get it out of the house fast. She wanted to scrub away any evidence that I had ever existed there. One evening, I drove past the house. It was late, and I told myself I was just checking the mail, but deep down, I wanted to see the damage. I parked down the street and looked through the iron gates. What I saw made my stomach turn. My rose garden was gone. For 10 years I had cultivated those roses. There were rare breeds from England, vibrant reds and soft pinks. I used to spend hours out there pruning and watering, finding peace in the soil, when the stress of building Julian's company became too much. It was my sanctuary. Now it was just a pit of mud. A yellow bulldozer sat in the middle of the devastation. I watched from the car as Tiffany walked out onto the patio holding a glass of wine. She was pointing at the hole in the ground, instructing a contractor. I rolled down my window just enough to hear her shrill voice. "I want the infinity pool to go right to the edge," she was saying. "Make it modern. Make it sleek. I do not want any plants. Plants are messy. I want concrete and white stone." She was paving over my sanctuary to build a monument to her own vanity, a concrete slab where nothing could grow. I rolled up the window and drove away. I did not cry. Tears were for people who had lost. I had not lost. I was just waiting. While Tiffany destroyed the home, Tyrell was busy destroying the finances. Since Julian had fired the CFO, claiming he wanted to streamline operations, Tyrell had appointed himself the new head of finance. His qualifications consisted of a failed rap career and a bankruptcy filing 3 years ago. I still had access to the transaction alerts on the corporate credit cards. Julian, in his arrogance, had never bothered to change the administrator email. Every night my phone would light up with the evidence of their gluttony. Alert charge of $5,000 at the Gold Room nightclub. Alert charge of $12,000 at Saks Fifth Avenue. Alert charge of $8,000 for a private jet charter to Miami. Tyrell was treating the company treasury like his personal piggy bank. He was buying Rolexes for his friends. He was paying for bottle service for women who would not look at him twice if he were driving his own car. And Julian let it happen. Julian was too busy preparing for the IPO, the initial public offering, that was supposed to make him a billionaire overnight. He was so focused on the bell-ringing ceremony on Wall Street that he forgot to check the engine of the rocket he was riding. Inside the glass walls of Apex Solutions, panic was beginning to set in. My old team, the engineers I had hired and trained, were sending frantic emails to the executive suite. "The system is lagging," one email read. "We are seeing latency issues in the core processing unit. Clients are complaining about slow load times." Julian's reply was short and dismissive. "Reset the servers. I am in a fitting for my tuxedo. Do not bother me with minor glitches." Another engineer wrote, "Sir, we cannot just reset. The architecture seems to be destabilizing. We need to access the source code to run a diagnostic. We do not have the encryption key." Julian did not even reply to that one. He assumed the encryption key was in his desk drawer or on a sticky note somewhere. He did not realize that the encryption key was not a password. It was a legal license. And that license was tied to a contract that was silently counting down. 3 days before the IPO, Julian threw a massive pre-celebration party at the house. It was a white party. Everyone had to wear white. He hired a famous DJ. He had acrobats suspended from the ceiling. He had a champagne fountain in the foyer, right where my grandmother's antique console table used to be. I saw the photos on Instagram. Candy, the new girlfriend, was wearing a dress that looked like a napkin. Tiffany was wearing a white gown with a train so long people kept stepping on it. Julian stood in the middle of it all, holding a microphone, looking like a king. "We did it," he shouted to the cheering crowd. "We built this from nothing. And on Monday morning, when Apex goes public, we are going to rule the world." The crowd roared. Champagne corks popped. They danced on the grave of my marriage. They danced on the dirt where my roses used to bloom. But while the bass thumped and the lights flashed, a different scene was playing out in the server room at the Apex headquarters downtown. The room was dark and cold, filled with the hum of massive server racks. These machines were the heartbeat of the company. They processed millions of transactions a day for banks, hospitals, and logistics firms. They ran on the code I had written, the code I had birthed. On the main terminal screen, a small dialog box had appeared weeks ago. At first, it was just a yellow warning light, a notification that the software license was pending renewal, but nobody checked the main terminal. Julian had fired the night shift monitoring team to save money for his party, so the warning sat there unnoticed. It blinked in the darkness. License holder, Maya Holdings, LLC. Status, license termination pending. As the clock ticked past midnight, marking the start of the final 24 hours before the IPO, the yellow light turned red. The hum of the servers seemed to change pitch. It became strained. The cooling fans spun louder, trying to compensate for a command that was being rewritten deep in the kernel of the system. Back at the mansion, Julian was laughing, his arm around Candy, holding a bottle of Ace of Spades. He looked at his brother Tyrell, who was drunk and dancing on a table. "Life is good," brother Julian shouted. "Nothing can stop us now." He raised his glass to the ceiling. At that exact moment in the silent server room, the text on the screen changed. The countdown hit 0. The grace period that I had legally mandated, the 30 days of mercy I had granted him to fix his mistake, ran out. A new message flashed across the monitor in bright crimson letters. Critical error. License expired. Unauthorized use detected. System lockdown initiated. The fans whirred down. The lights on the server racks flickered from steady green to flashing red. One by one, the connections began to sever. The data streams stopped. The engine of the billion-dollar car stalled on the highway. I was sitting in my apartment awake. I was not at the party. I was not drinking champagne. I was sitting in front of my laptop, watching the back-end diagnostic tool that only I had access to. I saw the red light appear on my screen. I saw the lockdown command execute. I took a sip of my herbal tea. "Happy anniversary, Julian," I whispered to the empty room. The party was still raging, the music was still loud, but the silence was coming, and when it arrived, it was going to be deafening. Monday morning arrived with the kind of electric energy that usually signals the start of something historic. For Julian Brooks, it was supposed to be the day he was crowned the king of the tech world. For me, it was the day I finally stopped holding my breath. I sat in my small kitchen wearing my pajamas, stirring a cup of cheap instant coffee. On the counter, my laptop was open to the live stream of the New York Stock Exchange. Beside it was a second monitor displaying the back-end command console for the Apex Solutions mainframe. The countdown timer on my screen read 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 30 seconds. On the television screen, Julian looked magnificent. I had to give him that. He was wearing a custom navy suit that probably cost more than my rent for the next year. His smile was blinding. He stood on the balcony of the exchange, surrounded by cheering executives. Tiffany was there, of course, pushing her way to the front, trying to get her face in the frame. She was wearing a white dress that looked ridiculous for a morning business event, waving at the camera like she was royalty. Tyrell was standing behind Julian, looking hungover but smug, clapping his hands and shouting something that the microphones could not pick up. The commentator on CNBC was breathless with excitement. Apex Solutions is set to debut at $50 a share, with a valuation of $2 billion. This is the tech unicorn of the decade, folks. Julian Brooks has built a machine that runs the logistics of half the country. I took a sip of my coffee. The bitterness was grounding. Julian Brooks did not build a machine, I whispered to the empty room. Julian Brooks built a shiny plastic case. I built the machine. On the screen, the countdown clock for the market open began. 10, 9, 8. Julian grabbed the wooden gavel. He looked like he was about to ascend to heaven. He was laughing, soaking in the adoration. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was actually a trap door. 7, 6, 5. I reached out and hovered my finger over the enter key on my laptop. The script was already written. The command was cued. All it needed was the final execution. 4, 3, 2. Julian raised the gavel high. His eyes were shining with greed. He was thinking about the billions. He was thinking about the yachts. He was thinking about how he had won. 1. Julian brought the gavel down. The bell rang loud and clear, signaling the start of the trading day. Confetti rained down. The crowd roared. I pressed enter. "Execute Order 66, I murmured. The effect was instantaneous. It was not a slow decline. It was a cliff. Behind Julian, on the massive digital screens that covered the walls of the trading floor, the Apex Solutions logo was proudly displayed. It was a sleek blue triangle. But exactly 3 seconds after the bell rang, the blue triangle flickered. It turned static gray for a heartbeat, and then the entire wall of screens turned a violent, flashing crimson red. The cheering faltered. People started pointing. Julian turned around, his smile freezing in place. The text on the screen was not the stock price. It was not the ticker symbol APX. It was a message scrolling in bold black block letters. Critical system failure. License revoked. Property of Maya Holdings, LLC. Unauthorized usage detected. The CNBC commentator stopped mid-sentence. It seems we are having some technical difficulties with the display board. Or wait, is that a hack? It was not a hack, it was a repossession. On the trading floor below, chaos erupted. Traders who had been shouting buy orders suddenly started screaming into their phones. The ticker symbol for Apex, which had opened at $50, started blinking rapidly. 45, 40, 32. It was in free fall. I watched Julian's face. The color drained from his skin so fast he looked like a wax figure. He dropped the gavel. He turned to the exchange president, who looked furious and confused. Julian was mouthing the words, "What is happening?" What was happening was that all over the world, every single logistics company, bank, and hospital that used Apex software was seeing the exact same red screen. The software had locked itself. The database was encrypted. The engine had simply vanished. My phone started buzzing. It was Mr. Cohen, my lawyer. "Regina," he shouted over the line. "Are you watching this?" "I am watching," I said calmly. "The stock is at $20. It has been 2 minutes. This is a bloodbath. It is justice, Mr. Cohen." On the TV screen, Julian was panicking. He was shoving people out of his way, trying to get off the balcony. Tiffany was looking around wildly, realizing the cameras were no longer filming a coronation, but a disaster. She tried to hide behind Tyrell, but he was too busy checking his phone, probably seeing his net worth evaporate in real time. The camera cut to a reporter on the floor. "Panic here at the NYSE. Apex Solutions software appears to be down globally. Investors are dumping the stock. There are rumors of a major intellectual property dispute. The stock is currently trading at $12 and dropping fast." I switched tabs to the back-end console. The system was reporting millions of failed login attempts. The beautiful code I had written, the algorithm that could route a package from Tokyo to New York in record time, was now sitting behind an impenetrable wall of encryption, and the only key was in my pocket. On the screen, I saw Julian pull out his phone. He was screaming into it. I could read his lips. "Fix it. Fix it now." I imagined the scene at the Apex headquarters, the engineers running around like headless chickens, the server room flashing red. A few minutes later, the news anchor cut back to the studio. "We have breaking news. We are hearing reports that the entire Apex system has been remotely locked due to a licensing expiration. We are trying to get a statement from the CEO." Julian was now on the floor level, surrounded by angry investors and shouting reporters. He looked small. He looked sweaty. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a man watching his life burn down. He held the phone to his ear, his hand shaking. I pulled up the audio log from the server room, which I had bugged access to. I wanted to hear this conversation. Julian's voice crackled through my speakers. "What do you mean you cannot bypass it? You are the CTO. Hack it. Break it. Just get it back online." Then I heard the voice of Marcus, the lead engineer. A good man who I had hired 5 years ago. "We cannot." "Julian." Marcus sounded terrified. "It is not a bug. The source code is gone. It has been recalled. The system says we do not own the rights to run the kernel. It says the owner is Maya Holdings." "Who the hell is Maya Holdings?" Julian screamed, causing people around him to flinch. There was a silence on the line, a heavy, pregnant silence. Julian Marcus whispered, "You signed the transfer papers. I saw the legal update in the system this morning. You transferred the IP rights to a separate entity. We are running pirated software right now. We are illegal." Julian stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the chaotic trading floor, confetti still stuck to his expensive shoes. The ticker overhead flashed, "APX 4.50, Maya Holdings," he whispered. And then I saw the realization hit him. It hit him like a physical blow. His knees actually buckled. He grabbed onto a railing to support himself. Maya, my daughter. He looked directly into the news camera. For a second it felt like he was looking right at me, right into my kitchen. He looked like a ghost. He remembered the meeting. He remembered the joke about the piggy bank. He remembered signing the paper without reading it because he was too busy staring at the assets he thought mattered. He had taken the house. He had taken the cars. But he had given away the brain. The stock hit $2. Trading was halted by the exchange due to volatility. In 15 minutes, $2 billion of market value had been wiped out. Tiffany was crying now. She was yelling at a cameraman to get out of her face. Tyrell was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. I closed the laptop. The show was over. The climax had been delivered. I finished my coffee. It was cold now, but it tasted like victory. My phone rang again. This time it was not my lawyer. It was Julian. I looked at the screen. His picture popped up, a photo from happier times when we were building this dream together. I let it ring. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then I picked up the phone and blocked the number. I stood up and walked to the window of my small apartment. The sun was shining. The world outside was moving on. But Julian's world had stopped spinning. He wanted to be a solo act. He wanted all the credit. Well, now he had it. He was the sole captain of a sinking ship, and he had thrown away the only life raft. I went into the bedroom where Maya was playing with her dolls. She looked up and smiled. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked. I sat down on the floor and hugged her. "I am better than okay, baby," I said, kissing her forehead. "I just made sure that nobody will ever steal from us again." Julian's IPO day would go down in history, but not in the way he wanted. It would be studied in business schools for decades. The day the golden sun flew too close to the sun and got burned by the wife he thought was just a shadow. And the best part, I had not even sued him. I had not screamed. I had not made a scene. I had simply enforced the contract he signed. Cold, hard justice. The chaos on the trading floor was just the overture. The real symphony of destruction was about to play out in the inboxes of every board member, executive, and regulator associated with Apex Solutions. I sat in my kitchen, my laptop screen casting a cool blue glow on my face as I dialed Mr. Cohen. He answered on the first ring. His voice was trembling slightly, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of a lawyer who is about to drop a nuclear bomb on opposing counsel. "Regina, are you sure you want to send this?" Cohen asked. "Once I hit send, there is no going back. This will trigger SEC investigations. This will trigger lawsuits. This will effectively burn Apex to the ground." I looked at the picture of Julian on my fridge. I looked at the spot where my daughter sat playing with cheap plastic dolls because her father had thrown away her favorite bear. "Send it," I said softly. I hung up and imagined the scene inside the Apex boardroom. I knew exactly what was happening because I had built the notification system that alerted the executives to high-priority emails. I knew that in exactly 3 seconds, every phone and tablet in that glass-walled room would ping in unison. 1, 2, 3. In the boardroom on the 42nd floor, Julian was pacing back and forth, sweating through his custom suit. The stock was halted. The investors were screaming. He was yelling at his chief legal officer, demanding to know why the servers were locked. Then the sound happened. Ping, ping, ping. A cascade of notifications rippled around the long conference table. The chairman of the board, a ruthless man named Sterling Vance, looked down at his iPad. His face went gray. Julian Vance said, his voice cutting through the noise like a razor. "You need to read this email from Regina's lawyer." Julian stopped pacing. He grabbed his phone. I could practically see his eyes scanning the subject line. "Notice of intellectual property, repossession, and license termination." He opened the email. It was CC'd to the entire board of directors, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Department of Justice. The email was short. It was brutal. It was undeniable. "Dear Mr. Brooks and the Board of Apex Solutions, please be advised that as of 9 a.m. this morning, the license agreement between Maya Holdings LLC and Apex Solutions Inc. has been formally terminated. Julian surely squinted at the screen, his heart hammering against his ribs. The email continued. As you are aware, the core source code, the proprietary algorithms, and the entire back-end architecture of the Apex platform are the sole property of Maya Holdings, LLC. Apex Solutions has been operating under a lease agreement granted by the owner Regina Brooks. I imagined Julian reading my name. I imagined him choking on it. Per the terms of the original licensing agreement dated 6 years ago and reaffirmed in the divorce settlement signed by Mr. Brooks yesterday, the lease is contingent upon the continued marriage of the licensor and the licensee. With the finalization of the divorce, the lease is null and void, effective immediately. Furthermore, any continued use of the software constitutes federal copyright infringement and theft of trade secrets. Julian looked up from his phone. The room was deadly silent. 12 pairs of eyes were staring at him. These were men and women who controlled billions of dollars. They looked at him like he was a contagion. "What is this?" Julian Vance asked, standing up. "Is this true? Does your ex-wife own the code?" Julian stammered. No, she does not. She is just a housewife. She baked cakes sterling. She does not know how to code. This is a bluff." The chief legal officer spoke up. He was pale. He was looking at the attachment to the email. "It is not a bluff, Julian. She attached the copyright registration. It is dated 6 years ago. It is signed by you, and she attached the divorce decree, the one you signed yesterday." The lawyer projected the document onto the main screen. There it was in high definition. Julian's signature. The aggressive loop of the J, the arrogant slash of the B. And right above it, the clause he had been too busy laughing to read. The clause that transferred all rights of Maya Holdings to me. "You signed it," Vance whispered. "You signed away. The company is Brain." "I did not know," Julian whispered. "I thought it was just a savings account for the kid." Vance threw his iPad across the table. It slid across the polished wood and crashed into a pitcher of water. "You thought," Vance roared. "You just took a company public with a $2 billion valuation, and you do not own the product you are selling. That is fraud, Julian. That is securities fraud. We are all going to prison because you were too arrogant to read a contract." Julian backed away toward the window. He looked down at the city below, the city he thought he owned. Now it looked like a prison. "Fix it," he begged the lawyer. "Call her. Offer her money. Offer her anything." "We cannot fix this," the lawyer said, closing his laptop. "She CC'd the SEC. The investigation has probably already started. The stock is dead. The company is dead." Julian felt his knees give way. He collapsed into one of the expensive leather chairs. He struggled to breathe. His chest felt tight. He had spent 10 years building a reputation as a genius. In 5 minutes I had revealed him to be nothing more than a tenant in a house I built. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Then suddenly a phone rang. It was not a board member. It was not the SEC. It was Julian's personal cell phone lying on the table in front of him. The ringtone was loud and cheerful, a stark contrast to the funeral atmosphere in the room. It was the ringtone he had assigned to Tiffany. Julian stared at the phone. He did not want to answer it, but his hand moved automatically. He needed a lifeline. He needed someone to tell him it was going to be okay. He put the phone to his ear. "Tiffany." He croaked, his voice barely a whisper. He expected comfort. He expected her to say she was watching the news and she was worried about him. Instead, Tiffany's shrill voice pierced his ear loud enough for the lawyer standing next to him to hear. "Babe, you need to call the bank right now," she shrieked. "This is so embarrassing. I am at the Elysium Spa trying to pay for my seaweed wrap and facial, and your black card just got declined. The receptionist is looking at me like I am a pauper." "Fix this immediately, Julian. People are staring at me." Julian closed his eyes. He let out a laugh, a dry, broken sound that sounded more like a sob. She was at a spa. While his world was burning down while he was facing federal prison, she was worried about a facial. "Your card is declined, Tiffany," Julian said quietly. Well, obviously, she snapped. That is why I am calling. Transfer more money. There is no money, Julian said. What do you mean there is no money? She asked, her voice dropping. It is gone, Julian said. It is all gone. Regina took it. Regina! She screeched. What did that miserable woman do? She took the engine out of the car, Julian said, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. And we are driving off a cliff. He dropped the phone. He did not hang up. He just let it fall onto the plush carpet. He could still hear Tiffany screaming from the floor, demanding to speak to a manager, demanding he fix it, demanding her lifestyle be preserved. The chairman of the board stood up and pressed a button on the intercom. Security Vance said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. Please come to the boardroom. Mr. Brooks is leaving the building, and revoke his access pass on the way out. Julian looked up. He was being evicted from his own company, just like he had evicted me from my own home. I sat in my kitchen and watched the news alert flash across the bottom of the screen. Breaking news. CEO of Apex Solutions removed by board amid allegations of massive fraud. SEC suspends trading indefinitely. I closed my laptop. The legal strike had landed. The target was destroyed. I stood up and walked over to the trash can. I peeled the picture of Julian off the refrigerator, the one from the magazine cover, where he looked like a god. I crumpled it into a ball and dropped it on top of the coffee grounds. Goodbye, Julian, I whispered. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Mr. Cohen. It is done. They are calling for a settlement meeting. They want to know what you want. I smiled and typed back my answer. I do not want a meeting. I want to watch them burn for a little longer. Tell them I am busy. Tell them I am taking my daughter to buy a new teddy bear. I grabbed my keys and called out to Maya. Come on, baby. Put your shoes on. We are going shopping. As we walked out to the ugly rusted car, the sun seemed to shine a little brighter. The weight on my chest was gone. I had taken back my power. And the best part was, Julian still had no idea that losing the company was just the beginning. He still had the house, or at least he thought he did, but the bank notice was already in the mail. The fall of the House of Brooks was not a slow, graceful decline. It was a vertical drop at terminal velocity. In the 48 hours following the stock market crash, Julian went from being the golden boy of Atlanta to a pariah. I watched it all unfold from the safety of my apartment, sipping tea and monitoring the legal news wires. It was like watching a documentary about the Titanic, only I was the iceberg, and the captain had steered right into me on purpose. The lawsuits hit him first. They came in waves like a tsunami. First, it was the class action lawsuit from the shareholders who had lost millions in minutes. They accused Julian of gross negligence and securities fraud. Then came the Department of Justice announcing a formal investigation into whether Julian had knowingly misled investors about the ownership of the intellectual property. But the blow that actually brought him to his knees came from the banks. I knew exactly when it happened because I got a notification on my phone. Since my name was still technically on the joint mortgage, even though I had signed the quitclaim deed, the bank had not processed it yet. Due to the backlog, I received the alert. Account frozen, suspicious activity, federal seizure order. Julian was standing in his kitchen trying to transfer $10,000 to a criminal defense attorney. The transfer failed. He tried again. Failed. He called the bank, screaming at the poor teller. Sir, the teller said, her voice trembling. We have received a freeze order from the SEC. All assets associated with Apex Solutions and its officers are locked pending investigation. We cannot release a penny. Julian threw his phone against the wall. It shattered, leaving a dent in the expensive plaster Tiffany had just ordered. Speaking of Tiffany, the atmosphere inside that mansion had shifted from a party to a cage match. The renovation crew had walked off the job the moment the news broke, leaving the backyard a muddy pit of half-poured concrete. Tiffany was pacing around the living room, kicking at boxes of my old things she had planned to sell. I need cash, Tyrell, she screamed. The spa wouldn't let me leave until I gave them my diamond earrings as collateral. Do you know how humiliating that is? Tyrell was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. He looked like a man who had gambled his soul and lost. Shut up, Tiffany, Tyrell snapped. Julian is going to jail. We are all going to jail. I used the corporate card to buy your Range Rover. That is embezzlement. Tiffany stopped pacing. She looked at her husband with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. You what? She hissed. You told me Julian gave us that car as a bonus. I lied, Tyrell whispered. There were no bonuses. The company was bleeding cash even before the crash. We were living on credit, Tiffany. That was the moment the mask fell off. For months, Tiffany had played the role of the supportive sister-in-law, the classy white woman who was elevating the Brooks family brand. But now, with the money gone, the veneer cracked. She walked over to Tyrell and slapped him hard across the face. The sound echoed in the empty, cavernous room. You loser, she screamed. You pathetic, lying loser. I should have known better than to marry into this family. I thought you guys were different. I thought you were the good ones. But you are just like everyone said. Just a bunch of pretenders trying to act like you belong in this neighborhood. Tyrell looked up, shock written all over his face. What did you say? You heard me, Tiffany spat. Her face twisted and ugly. You dragged me down with you. I could have married a doctor. I could have married someone with old money. Instead, I married a fraud who steals from his own brother. And now look at me. My reputation is ruined. My friends are laughing at me. She grabbed a vase from the table, one of the few pieces of mine she hadn't sold yet, and threw it at him. It smashed against the wall, showering Tyrell with glass. I am leaving, she announced, storming toward the stairs. I am packing my bags and I am going to stay at the Four Seasons until you fix this. You cannot go to the Four Seasons, Tyrell yelled back, his voice cracking. We have no money, Tiffany. The cards are dead. You have nowhere to go. Tiffany froze on the stairs. She realized he was right. She was trapped in the mansion she had tried to steal with a husband she despised and no way out. She sat down on the step and began to wail, not out of sadness, but out of pure, selfish rage. Meanwhile, outside in the driveway, Julian was trying to stop the bleeding the only way he knew how. He was trying to sell the neon green Lamborghini. He had called a luxury car broker, a guy who specialized in quick cash deals for rappers and athletes. The broker arrived in a tow truck, looking at the car with a skeptical eye. It has 12 miles on it, Julian said, wiping sweat from his forehead. I paid $300,000 for it last week. Just give me $200 cash. I need it today. The broker shook his head. I cannot take it, Julian. What do you mean you cannot take it? Julian shouted. It is a brand new Lambo. It is pristine. It is a crime scene, the broker said, crossing his arms. I ran the VIN number on the way over. The bank put a lien on this car an hour ago. And since you paid for it with funds that are now subject to federal seizure, if I buy this car, I become an accessory to money laundering. He spit on the driveway. Right next to Julian is expensive Italian loafers. Besides, word on the street is, you are radioactive right now. Nobody wants to touch anything with the name Brooks on it. The broker climbed back into his truck and drove away, leaving Julian standing alone next to the green symbol of his hubris. The car was worthless. It was just a hunk of metal he couldn't drive, couldn't sell, and couldn't even put gas in because his cards were declined. Julian walked back into the house. He found Tyrell bleeding from a cut on his cheek and Tiffany sobbing on the stairs. They looked at him, expecting a miracle, expecting the genius CEO to pull a rabbit out of the hat, but the hat was empty. Fix this, Julian, Tiffany shrieked. Do something. I cannot, Julian whispered. Regina took the code. Then call her, Tyrell begged. Beg her. Get on your knees. Give her whatever she wants. Julian laughed, a hollow, broken sound. I cannot call her. She blocked me. Just then, a heavy pounding came from the front door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the authoritarian thud of law enforcement. The three of them froze. The silence in the house was heavy, suffocating. Julian walked to the door, his legs feeling like lead. He opened it. Standing there was not the police. It was a sheriff deputy holding a staple gun and a bright orange piece of paper. Behind him was a man in a cheap suit holding a clipboard, a representative from the bank. "Julian Brooks?" the deputy asked. "Yes," Julian whispered. "This is a notice of default and immediate foreclosure proceedings," the bank representative said. "You missed 3 mortgage payments prior to the divorce, and with the freezing of your assets, the bank has exercised the acceleration clause. The entire balance of $3.8 million is due immediately. But I have equity," Julian stammered. "Not anymore," the man said. "The market value has dropped because of the condition of the property." He looked past Julian at the destroyed garden, the half-dug pool, and the pile of trash in the foyer. "Since you cannot pay," the deputy said, lifting the staple gun, "we are posting this notice. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises before the locks are changed." Thwack, thwack, thwack. The sound of the staples going into the solid oak door was like gunshots. The bright orange paper stood out against the dark wood, a beacon of shame for the entire neighborhood to see. Foreclosure, eviction imminent. The deputy turned and walked away. The bank rep followed. Julian stood there staring at the paper. The house he had fought so hard to keep. The house he had kicked me out of. The house he had let Tiffany destroy. It was gone. He turned around to face his family. Tiffany had stopped crying. She was staring at the orange paper, her face pale. "We are homeless," she whispered. Julian slid down the door until he hit the floor. He pulled his knees to his chest. For the first time in his life, Julian Brooks cried. He didn't cry for his wife. He didn't cry for his daughter. He cried for his things, and the terrible realization that without his things, he was absolutely nothing. I watched the update come through on the Neighborhood Watch app. A neighbor had posted a photo of the orange sticker on the door with the caption, "Looks like the party is over at the Brooks estate." I zoomed in on the photo. I zoomed in on the staples. "It is just beginning," I said to myself. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Cohen. "Cohen here." "Mr. Cohen," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Contact the bank holding the note on Julian's house. Tell them there is an interested buyer for the distressed property." Regina Cohen asked, surprised. "You want to buy it back?" "After what they did to it, I want to buy the debt," I said. "I do not just want the house, Mr. Cohen. I want to be the one who holds the keys when they walk out. I want to be the one standing in the driveway when Tiffany drags her suitcases to the curb." Cohen paused. "That is cold, Regina." "It is business," I said. "Get it done." I hung up. The sun was setting over Atlanta, casting long shadows across the city. Somewhere in the distance, sirens were wailing. I liked to think they were coming for Julian, but even if they weren't, his prison was already built. And I had the only key. The 72-hour notice had expired. I knew it. The bank knew it. The sheriff department knew it. The only person who seemed unaware of the gravity of the situation was Tiffany. While Julian sat catatonic in the guest bedroom staring at the wall, Tiffany had decided to launch a counteroffensive the only way she knew how. She went live on social media. I sat in my car parked 2 blocks away, watching the live stream on my phone. The signal was clear. Tiffany had set up a ring light in the middle of the foyer, right in front of the grand staircase she had threatened to tear down. She was wearing designer sunglasses indoors, likely to hide her puffy eyes, and she had applied a fresh coat of lipstick. The caption of the video read, "We are under attack. Please donate to help fight corruption." "Hey guys," Tiffany said into the camera, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "I know you have all seen the news. I know you have heard the lies about Julian and the company. But what they are not telling you is that we are victims of a massive conspiracy. The government is trying to silence us because we were too successful. And now they are trying to illegally evict us from our home." She wiped a fake tear from her cheek. "We have no access to our accounts because of the hackers," she lied smoothly. "We need your help to pay for legal defense. If you believe in justice, please send whatever you can to the Cash App link pinned below. Even $5 helps keep a roof over our heads." I watched the comments roll in. Most of them were laughing at her. Some were asking where the furniture went, but a few deluded souls were actually sending money. It was pathetic. She was using my house as a backdrop to beg strangers for lunch money. Suddenly on the screen, I heard a noise that was not part of her script. It was the sound of heavy boots on pavement. Then the doorbell rang. It was a long, insistent ring. Tiffany froze. She looked at the door, then back at the camera. "See?" she whispered dramatically. "They are here to harass us again. Watch this, guys. I am going to record everything for evidence." She grabbed the phone and walked toward the massive oak doors. She threw them open, expecting to find a delivery driver or maybe a neighbor she could yell at. Instead, she found 6 uniformed officers and a team of movers wearing jumpsuits with the bank's logo on the back. Sheriff Deputy Miller stepped forward. I recognized him. He was the one who had served the notice 3 days ago. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice flat. "The 72-hour grace period has expired. This property is now under the possession of the lender. You need to vacate the premises immediately." Tiffany laughed a high-pitched, nervous sound. She held the phone up to his face. "You are live, officer," she sneered. "Say hi to 20,000 people. You cannot kick us out. This is a civil matter. My husband is on the phone with his lawyers right now. We have rights. Squatters' rights. This is a foreclosure eviction, not a tenancy dispute," the deputy said, stepping into the foyer. "You are trespassing. You have 10 minutes to gather essential personal items and leave. Anything left behind will be removed by the preservation team." He signaled to the movers. They marched past Tiffany like she was invisible. One of them picked up the ring light stand and moved it aside. "Hey, do not touch my equipment!" Tiffany shrieked, grabbing the mover's arm. "That is my property. This is my house. I designed this interior. Do you see this paint color? I picked this." The mover shook her off and continued walking toward the living room. Tiffany turned back to the deputy. "Get them out of here. Arrest them. They are breaking and entering." You are the one we will be arresting if you do not calm down," the deputy warned. I watched on my screen as the camera shook. Tiffany was losing it. The reality was finally crashing down on her perfectly curated world. She turned the camera around to show the movers picking up the beige sectional sofa she had bought to replace my antique velvet ones. "Tyrell," she screamed. "Tyrell, get down here. They are taking the sofa." But Tyrell was not coming down. Through the camera lens, I saw a movement in the background. In the reflection of the large hallway mirror, I saw Tyrell running. He was not running to help his wife. He was running toward the back door. He was carrying a duffel bag stuffed with who knows what, probably Juliana's watches and the little cash they had hidden in the house. He looked terrified. He glanced at the front door, saw the cops, and made a beeline for the kitchen exit. He was abandoning her. He was leaving her to face the music alone. Tiffany saw him too. She spun around, screaming, "Tyrell, where are you going? Do not leave me here with these pigs." The back door slammed shut. Tyrell was gone. Tiffany stood alone in the foyer. Her husband had fled. Her brother-in-law was useless. Her allies had vanished. All she had was a phone and an audience of strangers watching her hit rock bottom. "No," she screamed, throwing the phone onto the floor. It did not break. It landed face up, so the live stream continued filming from a low angle. I watched the ceiling as Tiffany threw herself at the nearest mover. "Put it down," she yelled, clawing at the man who was carrying a lamp. "That costs $3,000. That is assault," the deputy shouted. He moved in fast. Tiffany swung her arm wildly, hitting the deputy in the chest. It was a weak hit, but it was enough. "That is it," the deputy said. I saw a flurry of movement. Tiffany was spun around. Her arms were pulled behind her back. The click of handcuffs echoed through the empty house. "Get off me," she wailed. "Do you know who I am? I am Tiffany Brooks. I am an influencer. This is police brutality. I cannot breathe." "You are breathing fine, Ma," the deputy said, hoisting her up. You are under arrest for trespassing, resisting eviction, and assaulting an officer. You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it." They dragged her out the front door. She was kicking and screaming, her heels scraping against the marble floor she loved so much. As they passed the phone lying on the floor, one of the deputies looked down, saw it was recording, and kicked it toward the door. The screen went black. I lowered my phone. The show was over inside, but the finale was happening outside. I started my car and drove slowly down the block, pulling up across the street from the house. It had started to rain. A heavy gray drizzle that soaked everything instantly. The movers were ruthless. They were not packing boxes. They were clearing a property. They brought out the furniture Tiffany had bought on credit, the white linen sofas, the untreated oak tables, the beige rugs. They dumped them on the curb. It was a mountain of expensive blandness. The rain began to fall harder. I watched as the water soaked into the white fabric of the sofa, turning it a gross gray color. I watched the expensive rug turn into a sodden, heavy mess. The cardboard boxes of Tiffany's clothes, which she hadn't had time to pack properly, were tossed onto the wet grass. Designer dresses spilled out into the mud. Tiffany was sitting in the back of the squad car. The window was rolled down slightly. She was watching her things, her identity get ruined by the elements. Her hair was wet, plastered to her face. Her makeup was running. She looked like a raccoon. She saw my car. I rolled down my window. I was driving the ugly, rusted sedan I had bought, but in that moment, I felt like I was in a chariot. I locked eyes with her. She lunged at the window, screaming something I couldn't hear, but I saw her mouth the words, "I hate you." I just smiled and tapped the steering wheel. I watched as the movers brought out one final item. It was a painting, a large abstract canvas that was just a single white stripe on a beige background. Tiffany had paid $10,000 for it, claiming it spoke to her soul. The mover tossed it on top of the pile. It landed face up. The rain washed over it, dissolving the paint, turning the art into a running streak of nothingness. The deputy got into the driver's seat of the squad car. The lights flashed blue and red against the gray sky. They drove away, taking Tiffany to central booking, where she would have to trade her silk robe for an orange jumpsuit. I looked at the house. The front door was wide open. The movers were finishing up. The house was empty. It was purged. The bad energy was gone. The parasites had been removed. My phone buzzed. It was Mr. Cohen. "The bank accepted the offer," he said. "They just want the debt off their books. They are overnighting the keys to you. You own the note, Regina. You are the lender." I looked at the foreclosure sign still stapled to the door. It didn't matter anymore. "I own it," I whispered. I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving the pile of wet beige trash on the curb for the garbage truck. Julian was somewhere inside, hiding in the guest room, or maybe he had run out the back with Tyrell. It didn't matter. He was a squatter now. And I was the landlord coming to collect. The rain that had started during Tiffany's eviction had turned into a relentless gray downpour by the morning of the auction. The mansion stood like a weeping giant on the hill, its windows dark, its landscaping ruined, and its spirit broken. What was once the jewel of the neighborhood, the symbol of Julian's meteoric rise, was now just a distressed asset on a bank officer's clipboard. I parked my car at the bottom of the hill, just out of sight. I wanted to watch the proceedings before I made my move. A small group of investors had gathered near the front gate, holding umbrellas and looking skeptical. These were the vultures of the real estate world, men who bought tragedies for pennies on the dollar and flipped them for profit. But today, even the vultures looked hungry. I listened as the auctioneer, a man with a monotone voice and a cheap raincoat, read the terms of the sale. "Property is sold, as is where is." He droned into a portable microphone. "Buyer assumes all outstanding liens, including the federal tax liens against the previous owner and the pending litigation regarding the property boundaries. Opening bid is set at $1.5 million. Silence followed. The investors whispered among themselves, shaking their heads. They knew about the SEC investigation. They knew the house was radioactive. buying this house meant inviting the government into your finances, and nobody wanted that headache. 1.5 million, the auctioneer repeated, looking desperate. Do I hear 1.2? Still silence. A man in a trench coat laughed and walked back to his car. Too much baggage, he shouted. Burn it down and sell the land, then call me. Julian was standing under the awning of the garage, shivering in a sweater that looked like he had slept in it for 3 days. He watched the investors leave one by one. His face was a mask of despair. He knew that if the house did not sell at auction, the bank would simply seize it, board up the windows, and leave it to rot until the market improved. He would be left with the remaining debt and a bankruptcy on his record that would last for 7 years. The auctioneer sighed and capped his pen. No bids received, he announced. The auction is closed. The property reverts to the bank as inventory. We will schedule a secure lockout for noon today. Julian slid down the wall of the garage and put his head in his hands. It was over. The last piece of his empire had officially crumbled. That was my cue. I pressed the ignition button of my new car. It was not the rusted sedan I had driven away a month ago. It was a brand new Mercedes Maybach, purely black, with an interior that smelled like victory. The engine purred a low, deep growl that vibrated in my chest. I drove slowly up the winding driveway, the tires crunching on the wet gravel. The auctioneer looked up, surprised to see a vehicle approaching after the sale had ended. Julian lifted his head, his eyes narrowing through the rain. I pulled up right in front of the main entrance, blocking the path of the bank official's van. The driver's side door opened, and I stepped out. An assistant I had hired for the day immediately opened a large black umbrella over my head, shielding me from the rain. I was wearing a white tailored suit, sharp and pristine. It was a stark contrast to the mud, the gray sky, and the gloom that hung over the estate. I wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy, because I wanted them to see their own reflection in my eyes. I walked toward the auctioneer, my heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement. Is the bidding officially closed? I asked, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain. The auctioneer looked me up and down. He recognized the clothes. He recognized the car. He saw money. Technically, yes, ma'am, he said. But the bank is always willing to entertain a cash offer to clear the books. Are you an investor? I removed my sunglasses and looked at the house. I am an interested party, I said. Julian stood up. He walked slowly out into the rain, ignoring the water soaking his expensive sweater. He squinted at me, his eyes red and swollen. Regina, he whispered. He sounded like he was seeing a ghost. In a way he was. He was seeing the ghost of the woman he thought he had buried under his ambition. What are you doing here? Julian asked, his voice cracking. You came to gloat. You came to watch me lose everything. I turned to him slowly. I did not smile. I did not look angry. I looked at him with the indifference of a stranger. I am not here for you, Julian, I said. I am here for business. I turned back to the auctioneer. I am prepared to make an offer, I said. But not for 1.5 million. Given the damage to the landscaping, the missing fixtures, and the toxic legal status of the previous owner, I am offering $800,000. Cash. Today. The auctioneer's eyes widened. 800,000 was low, but it was guaranteed money. It would cover the administrative costs and get this headache off their hands. He pulled out his phone. I need to call the vice president, he said, stepping away. Julian stumbled closer to me. 800,000. He laughed hysterically. You do not have $800,000, Regina. You have a savings account with $5,000 in it. Remember, you are broke. You are living in a rental. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Go home, he spat. Stop playing pretend. You cannot save me, and you certainly cannot buy this house. I looked at him calmly. I am not trying to save you, Julian, I said. And as for the money, you are right. I did not have it a month ago. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded document. I held it out to him, but I did not let him touch it. Do you know who owns the biggest competitor to Apex Solutions? I asked. Julian frowned, confused. Global Logistics, he muttered. They are dinosaurs. They have been trying to build a platform like mine for years. Like yours, I corrected. Like mine, I continued. Well, yesterday afternoon, I had a very lovely meeting with the CEO of Global Logistics. It turns out they were very desperate for a modern source code to upgrade their systems. They were willing to pay a premium for a turnkey solution, especially one that was already market tested. Julian's face went pale. The water dripping from his nose looked like tears. What did you do? He whispered. I licensed the code, I said. The code I own. The code you signed over to me. I gave them an exclusive 10-year license to use the Maya Holdings architecture. They paid me a signing bonus of $2 million yesterday. Julian fell to his knees in the mud. He realized what had happened. The very thing he had discarded, the wife he had called useless, the intellectual property he had ignored, had just been sold to his greatest enemy. His genius was now powering the competition, and the money from that deal was standing right in front of him wearing a white suit. You sold my life as work to Global, he choked out. I sold my work, I corrected. You just provided the marketing. The auctioneer came back smiling broadly. He did not care about the drama. He only cared about the commission. The bank accepts your offer, Mom, he said, extending a hand. If you have the certified funds, we can close right now. I snapped my fingers. My assistant handed me a sleek leather portfolio. I pulled out a cashier's check that I had prepared earlier. I handed it to the auctioneer. The keys, I said, holding out my hand. The auctioneer fumbled in his pocket and dropped a heavy ring of keys into my palm. The metal felt cold and heavy. It felt like justice. Congratulations, Mrs. Brooks, the auctioneer said. The property is yours. It is Miss King now, I said, using my maiden name. I turned to Julian. He was still on his knees, staring at the mud. He looked small. He looked finished. You have 5 minutes to get off my property, I said. Julian looked up. Regina, please. I have nowhere to go. My accounts are frozen. Tiffany left me. Tyrell ran away. Just let me stay in the guest house, just for a few days, until I figure this out. I looked at the house. I looked at the balcony where he had announced our divorce. I looked at the spot where he had let Tiffany throw my daughter's teddy bear in the trash. I leaned down so I was eye level with him. Do you remember what you said to me that night? I asked softly. You said guests who make noise get evicted. Well, Julian, you made a lot of noise. I stood up and turned my back on him. Get off my land, I said. I walked toward the front door. The rain seemed to part for me. I walked past the pile of sodden furniture that the movers had left on the curb. I saw the beige sofa now stained brown with mud. I saw the abstract painting peeling in the wet. I saw a box of Tiffany's clothes soaking in a puddle. I did not step around them. I stepped right over them. I planted my heel directly onto a wet silk pillow that Tiffany had loved stepping it down into the mud. I reached the front door. The orange foreclosure sticker was still stapled to the wood. I ripped it off with one swift motion and crumpled it in my hand. I put the key in the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled stale. It smelled of neglect and bad decisions. The marble floors were scuffed. The walls were half-painted. It was a mess. But as I stood in the center of the grand entryway looking up at the chandelier that was dark and dusty, I did not see the ruin. I saw the potential. I took a deep breath, inhaling the air of ownership. This was not the house Julian built anymore. This was the house Regina bought. I walked to the middle of the room, and my heels echoed on the stone. I spun around slowly, my white suit glowing in the dim light. I am home, I whispered. Outside, I heard the sound of a car engine starting. It was the auctioneer leaving. Then I heard the slow, heavy footsteps of a man walking down the driveway, dragging his feet. Julian was leaving. He was walking down the hill in the rain, with nothing but the clothes on his back. I closed the heavy front door, shutting out the rain, shutting out the pity, and shutting out the past. I locked the deadbolt. I pulled out my phone and texted my contractor, the one Tiffany had fired. I got the keys. Bring the crew back tomorrow. We are painting the walls sage green. And find me the best rose bushes in the state. We have a garden to rebuild. I stood in the silence of my victory, and for the first time in 10 years the house felt quiet. It did not feel empty. It felt ready. I was the queen of the castle, and the king had been exiled to the streets. The game was over. I had won. The first night in the reclaimed house was peaceful. For the first time in years, the air did not smell of Julian's cologne or Tiffany's desperate perfume. It smelled of sage and rain and silence. I spent the morning supervising the locksmiths as they replaced every single tumbler in the heavy iron gates and the mahogany front doors. I reprogrammed the security code to a sequence of numbers that only I knew. I was not locking myself in. I was locking the past out. But the past has a way of lingering on the doorstep, especially when it has nowhere else to go. It was late afternoon when the security system chimed. A notification popped up on the iPad mounted in the kitchen. Motion detected. Front gate. I tapped the screen to view the camera feed. The image was high definition, crisp, and unforgiving. Standing outside the tall black bars of the gate was a man. At first glance, I did not recognize him. He was hunched over, shivering in the damp air. His hair, usually styled to perfection, was matted and wet. A dark stubble covered his jawline, hiding the arrogant chin that used to tilt up at the world. It was Julian. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn to the auction yesterday, but now they were wrinkled and stained. He looked like a ghost haunting his own graveyard. He was pressing the intercom button repeatedly, his movements jerky and desperate. I stared at the screen. A part of me, the old Regina, wanted to feel pity. The Regina who had loved him for 12 years wanted to rush out there with a towel and a hot cup of coffee. But then, I looked at the spot on the floor where Tiffany had stood mocking me. I remembered the courtroom where Julian had smiled while stripping me of everything. That pity died instantly. I poured myself a glass of water and walked slowly to the front door. I did not rush. I opened the door and walked down the long driveway. The gravel crunched beneath my boots. Julian saw me approaching. He gripped the bars of the gate, his knuckles white. "Regina," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Regina, please open the gate. It is cold." I stopped 5 feet away from him. The iron bars separated us, a physical manifestation of the legal and emotional wall I had built. "You are trespassing, Julian," I said, my voice calm. "I told you yesterday to leave." "I have nowhere to go," he rasped. His eyes were bloodshot, wild with panic. "The hotel kicked me out. My credit cards are dead. Even my phone service was cut off an hour ago. I walked here, Regina. I walked 5 miles. "That sounds like a personal problem," I said, crossing my arms. Julian slumped against the gate, sliding down until he was kneeling on the wet pavement. It was a shocking sight. The man who had stood on the balcony of the stock exchange, ready to rule the world, was now on his knees in the dirt, begging the woman he had discarded. "Regina, listen to me," he pleaded. "I was wrong." "Okay, I admit it. I was arrogant. I was stupid. I listened to Tiffany and I got greedy, but we can fix this." And he looked up at me, water dripping from his nose. "We were a good team once, remember," he said, trying to summon a charming smile, but failing miserably. "You and me against the world. We built Apex together. We can do it again. You have the code. I have the vision. We can restart." I stared at him, unable to believe the audacity. He actually thought he could talk his way back into my life. He thought a few minutes of humility could erase years of betrayal. "There is no we, Julian," I said. "And there is no restart. You destroyed the company. You are facing federal charges. You are toxic." Julian's face crumbled. He realized charm would not work, so he played his final card. The card he had tossed aside when it didn't suit him. "Do it for Maya," he whispered. My body went rigid. The sound of my daughter's name coming from his mouth felt like a violation. "Think about our daughter," he continued, his voice trembling. "Does she deserve to see her father like this? Does she deserve to grow up knowing her dad is on the street? Let me come in, Regina." For Maya. We can be a family again. I will be better, I promise. Something inside me snapped. It was a cold, sharp snap, like a branch breaking in winter. I threw my head back and laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was a sound that frightened the birds in the trees. It was a laugh of pure disbelief. You want to do it for Maya? I asked, stepping closer to the bars. The same Maya whose teddy bear you let Tiffany throw in the trash. The same Maya you called a distraction. The same Maya you tried to use as leverage to force me into a settlement. Julian flinched but kept kneeling. I was angry, Regina. I didn't mean it. You meant every word I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You want to start over. You want to pretend the last month didn't happen. You want to erase the affair, the humiliation, the theft of my work. Yes, he sobbed. Yes, please. Let us just go back to how it was. I looked down at him. Okay, I said. Julian's eyes lit up. Hope flooded his face. Really? Sure, I said. But there is a price. Anything, he said. Anything. Give me back my 10 years, I said. Julian blinked, confused. What? Give me back the 10 years I spent building your ego? I said, my voice rising. Give me back the nights I stayed up coding while you slept. Give me back the days I spent alone in this house raising our child while you were out living the bachelor life. Give me back my youth, Julian. Give me back the woman I was before you drained me dry. He stared at me, silence stretching between us. You cannot do that, he whispered. Exactly, I said. You cannot return what you stole. You took my time. You took my trust. And you tried to take my dignity. You are bankrupt, Julian, in every sense of the word. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. Julian watched my hand, expecting a key, maybe some cash, maybe a check. I pulled out a small rectangular piece of stiff paper. It was a white card with bold black text. I slid it through the bars of the gate. It fluttered down and landed in the mud next to his knee. He picked it up, his hands shaking. He read the text. St. Jude's Shelter for the Indigent. 404 West Peach Street. Beds, available 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. He looked up at me, his face pale with shock. What is this? He choked out. It is a referral, I said. I volunteer there sometimes. They have hot soup and they provide job training. You might need it since your resume is about to have a massive gap in it. Regina. You cannot be serious, he cried. I am Julian Brooks. I cannot stay in a homeless shelter. You are not Julian Brooks, the CEO, anymore, I said coldly. You are Julian Brooks, the defendant. And frankly, you are lucky I am giving you that card. It is more than you gave me when you kicked me out. I turned around to walk back to the house. Regina, wait! He screamed, grabbing the bars and rattling them. You cannot leave me here. What do I tell Maya? I stopped. I did not turn around. You tell her nothing, I said over my shoulder. Maya is smart. She knows the difference between a hero and a villain, and she definitely knows that she does not need a fraud for a father. I walked away. Behind me I heard him screaming my name. I heard him kicking the gate. I heard him crying, but the sounds were fading. The thick mahogany doors of my house were waiting. I stepped inside and locked the deadbolt. The sound of the lock sliding home was final. I walked into the kitchen where Maya was drawing at the table. She looked up. Who was at the gate, Mommy? She asked. I smiled and kissed the top of her head. Just someone who used to live here, baby, I said. But he does not live here anymore. I picked up the iPad and cleared the notification. The screen went black. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the garden I was about to rebuild. Julian was gone. The parasite had been removed, and I was finally free. The weeks following the reclamation of my home were a blur of construction crews and quiet satisfaction, but while I was busy painting my walls, a soothing shade of sage green, the world outside was busy tearing apart the people who had tried to destroy me. Justice, they say, is blind, but in the digital age, it is also high definition and permanently archived. Tiffany was the first to fall. The live stream she had started during her eviction didn't end when the deputy kicked her phone. The video was saved to the cloud, and within hours it had migrated from her small follower base to the front page of every drama blog and gossip site in Atlanta. The hashtag eviction diva started trending locally, then nationally. People weren't donating to her legal fund. They were remixing her meltdown. They made memes of her screaming about her beige sofa while being handcuffed. They turned her tearful plea for cash into a ringtone. The internet did what the internet does best. It dug. Online sleuths found her old tweets where she mocked people for living in apartments. They found photos of her wearing designer clothes that Tyrell had bought with stolen corporate funds. The narrative shifted instantly. She wasn't a victim, she was a villain. The fallout was swift and brutal. Tiffany's employer, a prestigious interior design firm in Buckhead, issued a public statement 2 days later. They wanted to distance themselves from the controversy. They fired her for conduct unbecoming of a representative of the brand. She lost her 6-figure salary. She lost her reputation. And since Tyrell had fled like a coward, she lost her access to any remaining cash. With nowhere to go, and no friends willing to take in a social pariah, Tiffany had to do the one thing she swore she would never do. She moved back in with her parents. I heard the details from a mutual acquaintance. Tiffany wasn't living in her childhood bedroom, which had been turned into a gym years ago. She was living in the basement. It was a damp, unfinished space in a modest house in Decatur, miles away from the luxury she felt entitled to. Her mother, a stern woman who had never approved of Tyrell, reportedly charged her rent. Imagine that. The woman who had sneered at my African art and thrown away my daughter as teddy bear was now sleeping on a futon surrounded by boxes of her ruined designer clothes, listening to her mother lecture her about her poor life choices. Every time she logged onto social media, hoping for redemption, the comments section reminded her of who she really was. She had wanted to be famous. Well, now she was. She was the most famous joke in Atlanta. While Tiffany was suffering a social death, Tyrell was facing a literal one. He hadn't made it far. After running out the back door of the mansion, he had checked into a cheap motel near the airport, planning to catch a flight to Miami. But he made a mistake. He used one of Juliana's secondary credit cards to pay for the room, thinking it might still work. It didn't work, but it did send a ping to the bank, and the bank sent a ping to the FBI. But the real knife in Tyrell's back didn't come from the bank. It came from his own brother. Julian was in federal custody, facing a mountain of charges. The prosecutors had him on securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement. He was looking at 20 years. His expensive lawyer, the one who had sneered at me during the divorce, told him there was only one way to reduce the sentence. He had to cooperate. He had to give them someone else. And Julian, the man who claimed family was everything, sang like a canary. He told the prosecutors everything about Tyrell. He handed over the credit card statements. He showed them the unauthorized transfers. He painted Tyrell as the mastermind behind the misuse of corporate funds to fund a lavish lifestyle. He threw his own brother to the wolves to save his own skin. Tyrell was arrested at the motel while eating a vending machine sandwich. The body cam footage was released later. He looked pathetic, crying and screaming that it was all Julian's idea. But it didn't matter. The forensic accounting was clear. He was charged with grand larceny and credit card fraud. Since he couldn't afford bail, he went straight to the county jail, waiting for a trial that would almost certainly end in a conviction. And then there was Julian. The trial of the century, as the local papers called it, lasted only 3 weeks. I didn't attend. I didn't need to see him in a suit that no longer fit properly, trying to charm a jury that hated him. I read the updates on my phone while I gardened in my backyard. The evidence was overwhelming. The email I had sent to the board was the smoking gun. It proved he knew about the IP transfer. It proved he had lied to investors. It proved he was a fraud. On the day of the sentencing, I was sitting in my living room with Maya. We were reading a book together. The sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the new furniture I had bought, pieces that were colorful and comfortable and undeniably mine. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking news. Former tech CEO Julian Brooks sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. 5 years. It seemed like a long time, but also not enough. He would serve time for the fraud, but there was no prison sentence for the emotional abuse. There was no jail time for the years he made me feel small. But as I looked at the headline, I realized I didn't care about the length of the sentence. I cared that he was gone. He was no longer a giant. He was just a number in the system. 6 months later, a former colleague of Julian sent me a message. He had a cousin who worked as a guard at the Federal Correctional Institution where Julian was housed. He told me a story that brought a smile to my face. It was a Tuesday evening in the prison common room. The inmates were allowed 1 hour of television time. Usually they argued over sports or movies, but that night the news was on. Julian was sitting in the back corner alone. He had lost weight. His hair was graying. He wasn't the alpha male anymore. He was just inmate 8940. On the television screen, a familiar face appeared. It was me. I was being interviewed on CNBC, the same channel that had broadcast Julian is disastrous IPO. I was wearing a sharp emerald green blazer sitting next to the CEO of Global Logistics. The lower third graphic read, Regina King, tech innovator and philanthropist. The reporter was asking me about the new scholarship fund I had started for young girls in STEM. Ms. King, the reporter asked, you have revolutionized the logistics industry with your code. What is your advice for women who feel their contributions are being overlooked? On the screen, I smiled. It was a genuine, radiant smile. My advice is simple, I said to the camera. Own your work. Never let anyone put their name on your brilliance. And if they try, remind them that the architect always knows where the demolition switch is. In the prison common room, the guard reported that Julian stopped eating his dinner. He stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He watched the woman he had called a housewife, the woman he had told to get a job, the woman he had tried to leave with nothing. He watched her being celebrated by the world. The other inmates didn't know who I was. One of them pointed at the screen and said, that lady is smart, and she is fine too. Who is that? Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. The irony was choking him. He was sitting in a cage wearing a uniform he didn't pick, eating food he didn't choose, watching the life he could have had if he hadn't been a fool. He stood up and walked back to his cell before the segment was over. He couldn't bear to watch the ending, but I lived the ending, ow, and it was beautiful. I turned off the iPad and looked out at my garden. The roses were blooming again, red, pink, and yellow petals unfolding in the sun. They were stronger than the ones before. They had survived the destruction and grown back from the roots, just like me. The leeches were gone. The parasites had been exterminated. The house was clean. I took a deep breath of fresh, free air. It is done. The spring sun over Atlanta felt different this year. It did not feel like a spotlight demanding performance. It felt like a warm blanket wrapping around shoulders that no longer carried the weight of a dead marriage. I stood in the center of my backyard, wiping dirt from my hands onto my gardening apron. 6 months ago, this spot had been a muddy scar left by Tiffany's vanity project, a concrete pit where my roses used to be. But nature, like a strong woman, knows how to heal if you give it the right resources. I had hired a landscape architect, but I did the planting myself. I needed to get my hands dirty. I needed to feel the roots taking hold. Now the garden was a riot of color. I had planted grandiflora roses, deep crimson and vibrant coral that climbed the trellises I had installed. I planted rows of lavender that filled the air with a calming scent, drowning out the memory of Tiffany's cheap perfume. Look, Mommy, I found a ladybug. I turned to see Maya running toward me. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress, and her hair was in 2 puffy braids. She was laughing. That sound was the best music I had ever heard. For years in this house, she had been quiet, constantly shushed by Julian, told to be invisible, told not to touch the expensive furniture. Now she was running through the grass, chasing butterflies, getting grass stains on her knees, and I did not care one bit. "It is a lucky ladybug, baby," I said, kneeling down to look at the tiny red speck on her finger. "Make a wish." Maya closed her eyes tight, scrunching up her face. "I wish we can stay here forever," she whispered. I pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the fresh earth. "We are staying," I promised her. "Nobody is ever kicking us out again." The peace of the afternoon was interrupted by the arrival of a sleek black sedan in the driveway. It was the team from Forbes magazine. They were here for the cover story. 6 months ago, I was the rejected wife, the woman left with nothing. Today, I was the CEO of Maya Holdings, the owner of the most sought-after logistics software in the world, and the founder of the Phoenix Initiative, a nonprofit helping women regain financial independence after divorce. I walked into the house to change. I walked past the spot in the foyer where I had watched Tiffany get arrested. I had replaced the cold marble with warm hardwood. I had hung my African art back on the walls, the masks and tapestries that Tiffany had called voodoo trash. They looked majestic against the sage green walls. I changed into a power suit. Not black, not navy, and definitely not beige. I wore a suit the color of crushed berries, vibrant and undeniable. The interview took place on the patio overlooking the new garden. The journalist was a young woman named Sarah, who looked at me with a mixture of professional curiosity and personal admiration. "Ms. King," Sarah asked, leaning forward, "your story has become a bit of a legend in the tech world. You went from being a silent partner to a mogul in 30 days. People call it a miracle. How do you explain it?" I took a sip of iced tea. I looked at the garden where Maya was now setting up a tea party for her new collection of teddy bears. "It was not a miracle, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "It was a correction." "Can you elaborate?" Sarah asked. "For 10 years, I let a man convince me that my contribution was support," I said. "I let him put his name on my code. I let him stand on the stage while I stood in the kitchen. I thought that was love. I thought being a good wife meant making myself small so he could feel big." I paused, thinking about the day Julian threw the divorce papers on the cake. But when he tried to erase me completely, I realized something. I had not just built the software, I was the software. The value was not in the lines of code on the screen. The value was in the mind that created them. Sarah was taking notes furiously. "So what is the lesson?" Sarah asked. "What do you tell the women who are reading this, the women who feel like they are living in someone else? Is shadow." I looked directly into the camera lens of the photographer who was snapping pictures. "I tell them that the biggest success is not writing $1 million software," I said. "It is not the house. It is not the car. The biggest success is knowing the price of your own soul and refusing to put it on a clearance rack." Julian thought he could bankrupt me because he took the bank accounts. But you cannot bankrupt a woman who knows she is the source of the wealth. The interview wrapped up an hour later. The crew packed up, shaking my hand with reverence. They treated me like royalty in the same house where I used to be treated like a servant. As the black sedan drove away, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. I sat on the patio enjoying the silence. My phone buzzed on the glass table. It was not a business email. It was not a text from Mr. Cohen. It was a text from a number I did not recognize. The area code was local, but the caller ID said State Correctional Facility, Inmate SMS Service. I stared at the screen. My heart did not race. My palms did not sweat. I felt a strange detachment, like I was looking at an insect trapped in a jar. I opened the message. "Regina, it is Julian. I used my last phone credit to text you. Please do not ignore me. It is hell in here. The food is inedible. I have lost 20 pounds. I need money for the commissary. Just a few hundred. Please. I know you sold the code for millions. You owe me this much. We were married for 10 years. Have a heart." I read the words twice. You owe me. Even in prison, wearing a uniform surrounded by bars, he still believed the world owed him something. He still believed I owed him something. He did not ask about Maya. He did not ask if she was happy. He did not ask if she liked her new school. He asked for money for snacks. He was still the same man, the same narcissist who had looked at a birthday cake and saw a surface to sign legal papers on, the same man who had looked at his wife and saw an employee he could fire. I thought about typing a reply. I thought about telling him that Maya won the spelling bee last week. I thought about telling him that I had bought the house back for pennies on the dollar. I thought about telling him that the roses were blooming. But then I realized that giving him any information was a form of currency. It was attention. And he was bankrupt. He did not deserve my anger. He did not deserve my pity. And he certainly did not deserve my words. I pressed my thumb on the contact info. I scrolled down to the bottom of the screen. Block caller. I confirmed the action. The message disappeared from my main inbox, filtered away into the digital trash can, just like the man himself. I put the phone down and stood up. The air was getting cool. "Mommy, look at the moon!" Maya shouted from the grass, pointing at the pale crescent rising above the trees. I walked down the steps and joined her. I took her hand. "It is beautiful, baby," I said. We stood there together, the queen and the princess of a kingdom we had fought for. The house behind us was glowing with warm light. It was no longer a fortress of expectations or a prison of emotional coldness. It was home. And as I looked at the moon, I whispered a final goodbye to the man who was sitting in a dark cell, wondering why I hadn't replied. "You wanted to be a self-made man, Julian. Well, you made your bed. Now you can sleep in it." "Come on, Maya," I said, turning back to the warmth of the kitchen. "Let us go make some hot chocolate. I think we have some marshmallows left." We walked inside and I closed the sliding glass door. The lock clicked shut. Solid, secure, permanent. The nightmare was over. The dream had begun. And the best part was, I didn't owe anyone a single % of it. It has been exactly 365 days since I signed that divorce decree. 365 days since Julian looked at me with pity and told me to get used to my new station in life. I am sitting in my office now. It is not the kitchen table where I used to hide my laptop under a pile of laundry. It is the corner office on the top floor of the Global Logistics Tower, where I serve as the Chief Innovation Officer. The view from here is breathtaking. I can see the entire city of Atlanta stretched out below me. Somewhere down there in the maze of streets is the shelter where Julian sleeps. Somewhere down there is the basement where Tiffany lives. And somewhere down there is the ghost of the woman I used to be. I often think about that woman, the old Regina, the one who baked cakes from scratch to please a man who was already full, the one who dimmed her own light so she wouldn't shine too brightly in her husband's eyes. I used to feel sorry for her. I used to look back at my past self with embarrassment, wondering how I let myself become so small. But today, looking out at this horizon, I do not feel pity. I feel gratitude, because without her pain, I would never have found my power. People ask me all the time how I did it. They ask about the legal strategy. They ask about the code. They ask about the business deal. But they are missing the point. The code was just a tool. The real weapon was my self-worth. For 10 years, I bought into the lie that is sold to so many women. The lie that says we are the support staff of the family. The lie that says our job is to be the wind beneath a man's wings. We are told that behind every great man is a great woman, but that is a dangerous preposition. Because if you are behind him, you are invisible, and if you are behind him, you are replaceable. Julian made the mistake of believing that lie. He looked at our marriage and saw a hierarchy. He was the CEO, and I was the intern. He was the sun, and I was just a planet orbiting his brilliance. He thought that by taking the visible assets, the house, the cars, the bank accounts, he was taking everything. He thought he was leaving me with nothing but air. But he forgot the most basic rule of architecture. You cannot build a skyscraper on quicksand. He forgot that the shiny glass windows and the marble lobby are not what keep the building standing. It is the foundation. It is the concrete poured deep into the dark earth where no one sees it. I was the foundation. I was the late nights. I was the strategy. I was the emotional stability. I was the intellect that solved the problems he was too arrogant to even understand. When he served me those divorce papers, he thought he was evicting a tenant. He didn't realize he was pulling the foundation out from under his own castle. And when you remove the foundation, the castle doesn't just wobble, it collapses. This is the lesson I want my daughter to learn. I want Maya to know that she is never the background character in someone else's story. I want her to know that her value is not in what she can sacrifice for others, but in what she can create for herself. I looked over at the small framed photo on my desk. It is a picture of Julian and me from our wedding day. I kept it not out of love but as a reminder. In the photo, he is looking at the camera, smiling that winning smile. But I am looking at him. I was looking for validation. I was looking for safety. I put the photo face down. I do not look for safety anymore. I build it. My assistant knocked on the door. Ms. King, the car is ready. Maya is waiting downstairs. I grabbed my purse. It is a different purse now. It holds my own black card, my own keys, and the deed to my own home. I walked down to the lobby where Maya was waiting. She is 8 years old now. She is taller. She is louder. She laughs with her whole body. She doesn't ask about her father anymore. She has learned that family is an action, not a title, and she has learned that her mother is indestructible. We walked out to the car. The Mercedes Maybach gleamed in the late afternoon sun. I opened the door for her. "Where are we going, Mommy?" she asked, buckling her seatbelt. "We are going wherever we want, baby," I said. Climbing into the driver's seat. I started the engine. The powerful hum vibrated through the steering wheel. I pulled out of the garage and merged onto the highway. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. It reminded me of the painting Julian had bought the night we met. The painting he kept in the divorce. He probably sold it for cigarette money by now. But I didn't need the painting. I had the real sunset. I rolled down the windows. The wind whipped through my hair. I looked over at Maya. She was singing along to the radio, her hand dancing in the wind. I thought about Julian one last time. I thought about his arrogance. I thought about his greed. And I realized that in a strange, twisted way, he was the best business partner I ever had. He pushed me out of the comfort zone I was rotting in. He forced me to liquidate my assets and invest them in the only stock that never crashes, myself. He wanted to take it all. He wanted to strip me bare. But he made a fatal calculation. He measured my worth by what I was wearing, not by what I was thinking. Women are not the Haofeng, the rear guard. We are the bedrock. We are the source code. And if you try to delete us, you crash the system. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The car surged forward, eating up the miles, leaving the city and the shadows behind us. The rearview mirror showed only the road we had traveled. But through the windshield, the future was wide open, and it was entirely mine. I smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "We are just getting started," I whispered to the wind. This story serves as a brutal wake-up call about the importance of intellectual property and financial agency within a marriage. Victory wasn't just about revenge, it was about the realization that being the silent partner is a liability, not a virtue. The narrative teaches us that true power lies in ownership, not just of assets, but of your own contributions. It reminds us that we teach people how to treat us, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to let the people who undervalue you face the consequences of your absence. Never build a kingdom on land you do not own, and never let anyone convince you that you are just a supporting character in your own life. Hit the like button if you agree that a woman is the foundation, not the furniture. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to reclaim your own power and write your own comeback story. And I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had to remind someone of your worth by walking away? Share your story, because your silence serves no one but your truth might set someone else free. Thank you for watching, and remember, the best revenge is not destroying them, it is building you. Thank you for watching.